Good evening. I call the regular meeting of the Ames City Council for December 12th to order. Welcome, everybody. And we're going to start out with a proclamation and an award presentation, and we'll go from there. Hey, Tim. Cliff and Jamie, you want to join me up here? Wreaths Across America Day. Whereas the National Wreaths Across America program began in 2007 as an expansion of the Worcester Wreaths program for laying wreaths on graves of veterans at Arlington National Cemetery each holiday season, and whereas the mission of Wreaths Across America is to remember the fallen, honor those who serve, and teach our children the value of freedom. This mission is symbolized by laying holiday wreaths on the graves of fallen heroes on the third Saturday of December every year. The theme for 2023 is Serve and Succeed. And whereas the Wreaths Across America program in Ames is organized by the Ames American Legion Riders with support from the American Legion Auxiliary, and Sons of the American Legion. The fourth annual wreath ceremony will take place on Saturday, December 16th at 11 o'clock at the Ames Municipal Cemetery with wreath placement immediately following the ceremony. And whereas there are approximately 1,800 veterans laid to rest in the Ames Municipal and Ontario cemeteries, and wreaths will be placed on each of the graves. And whereas Ames residents owe a deep debt of gratitude to all of those who served, are serving, and will serve in the armed forces. The Wreaths Across America program in Ames is an outstanding example of how we honor the sacrifices made by our fallen veterans. Therefore, I, John A. Hala, Mayor of the City of Ames, Iowa, do hereby proclaim Saturday, December 16th, 2023, as Wreaths Across America Day. I encourage Ames residents to join in extending thanks and appreciation to our veterans and their families for their service and sacrifice. And I might just add, you're also invited to attend and participate. It's a very meaningful opportunity to honor all the veterans who are laid to rest. And it's my honor to introduce Cliff Barker and his wife, Jamie, who have been spearheading this, and they become good friends, and they're going to say a few words about the ceremony. Cliff?
Yeah, my name's Cliff Barker. I'm the director of the Ames Legion Riders and the chairman for the Department of Iowa Legion Riders. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the City of Ames. When we brought this on in 2019, to have the city buy in like this behind us truly is, it really means a lot. With that, I'd like to introduce my wife, Jamie, who's actually the chair of the Committee for Wreaths Across America.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you so much for supporting us as we want to honor and cherish the memories of our veterans. Some of you, as I know, many of you have donated towards this cause, and we really couldn't do it without every donation we've received. So we have a lot of good support with our Legion Riders. We're all part of the American Legion, in case you're unfamiliar. And we'd like to invite you all to come on Saturday. It's at 11 o'clock at the Municipal Cemetery. We're fortunate that our mayor, Mayor Hala, has joined us each of the 4 years so far. And we just really appreciate your support. So in closing, I'd like to remind you that, again, the cemetery on East 9th Street at 11 o'clock. Following our short ceremony, we will begin laying 1,800 wreaths out there in recognition. So we'd love to have you join us. And at this time, we're going to have to go ahead and close. We have a semi-truck delivering tomorrow morning. If you're not busy, you can help us unload 151 boxes of wreaths tomorrow morning at 8:30. Thank you again.
Vanessa get thumbs up on the quiet hour. Good, thank you.
See you in a couple of days.
All right, and I would invite Chief Financial Officer Corey Goodnow and Nancy to come up, and we're honored to present what turns out to be an ongoing annual award. So the City of Ames is proud to announce that its 2023-2024 budget has been honored with a Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. The budget was submitted to the Budget Awards Program of the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada, GFOA, where it was reviewed by GFOA professional staff and by outside reviewers with experience in public sector budgeting. This is the 38th consecutive year that the City of Ames has been honored with the award. Approximately 1,700 cities, counties, and school districts in the United States and Canada annually receive this award. For budgets submitted for 2023-2024, 10 Iowa cities and 2 Iowa counties received this award. So it's my honor to present this to Corey and Nancy and invite them to share any thoughts if they'd like to.
Just a quick comment. The finance department's receiving the award tonight, but a lot of the city's departments put a lot of work into their budget. We appreciate all those extra efforts. So thanks for everybody's help with pulling this together, and we look forward to another exciting budget season coming up here soon.
All right, Council, we are working from an amended agenda. Item number 24, the Fitch Family Indoor Aquatic Center Council question follow-up is actually being postponed until our council meeting next week. So we'll move on to consent. Does anyone want to pull any item from consent this evening?
I'd like to pull item 10.
Item 10. Anything else? Entertain motion to approve consent less item number 10.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right.
On item 10, we just wanted to clarify that there was $5,228 available to administer as part of the Commission on the Arts grant for spring 2024. We received $11,515 worth of requests. And so in keeping with the award amount available, all of those finances were expended for a total of $5,228.
Okay. Any questions? Do you have a motion?
Move approval of item 10 with that clarification.
Thank you.
Second.
Move second. Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we're going to move on to public forum. This is a time we set aside for individuals to address city council. Actually, let's limit your time to 3 minutes. These are for items that are not on the agenda. And Richard, we'll start with you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
You know, it's like I wanted to say, you know, it's like they told me, the last mayor told me it's like they'll throw me out of every church in town for, and you're better than Jesus, you're better than God, you're better than I am. You know, and it's like don't know how to deal with churches, and I don't think they know how to deal with me. You know, it must be December. I keep telling myself night, day, all year, as if that excuse forgiven by someone, heard even.
Richard, do you have anything for city business tonight?
December,
Richard?
perhaps your north wind racing down my back, stars up there in the sky.
Richard. I'm going to ask you if you please sit down. Thank you. Anybody else want to address council under public forum? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 20. Motion approving, denying renewal of 12-month Class E retail alcohol license, Neighborhood Liquor and Smokes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So before you tonight is renewal of a 12-month liquor license application for Neighborhood Liquor and Smokes at 3505 Lincoln Way, Suite 105. This is not the first time this has been before you. So you may recall on November 8th, 2022, the council denied this application for Neighborhood Liquor and Smokes of their 12-month license. Since that time, they have appealed that decision to an administrative law judge, and I'll go through that in a little bit. And that's what allows them to continue to operate, is they'll continue to operate throughout the appeals process. So at the time of the denial back in November of 2022, what we presented to council was several failed compliance checks by the establishment, as well as a number of complaints by parents who reported that their minor children, in some cases even under the age of 18, were both purchasing alcohol and tobacco products. Specifically, we do compliance checks on establishments that hold liquor licenses. As you know, we take an underage person to the establishment, whether that be a bar, restaurant, retailer, and the liquor license the business will pass if they obviously don't sell to the minor, and they fail if they do. Neighborhood Liquor Mart failed a number of those. So on March 26th, 2021, an employee sold liquor to an underage person and was cited. We did a follow-up on February 11th, 2022, and an employee again sold alcohol to a minor. On May 15th of that year, the Iowa ABD, or Alcoholic Beverages Division, suspended the establishment's license for 30 days for that second violation within 2 years, and they were also given a fine. We did another follow-up compliance check on October 20th, 2022, when again an employee sold alcohol to a minor. In addition to those compliance check failures, you heard from at least one parent who said that her underage son had regularly purchased alcohol at that establishment. So since that time, we've had one hearing, so the first step in that appeals process with an administrative law judge. And on November 9th, 2023, so that's this year now, the ALJ affirmed the denial and basically said that he concluded on the evidence presented in this case, the Ames City Council acted appropriately and within the range of its authority, finding that the applicant was not a person of good moral character when it denied the 12-month liquor license renewal request from Neighborhood Liquor, and the decision should be affirmed. So basically, we won on that first step. This decision can now be appealed to the director of ABD. In addition to that, on September 29th, Neighborhood Liquor Mart failed another compliance check. So that was the fourth failure in less than 3 years. We had done, I think, 52 compliance checks over that weekend, and they were one of a few other businesses that failed the compliance check. On this date, we actually were able to obtain video from inside the store when the sale took place, and we were able to watch as our minor came in, presented an ID. The employee very quickly looked at it, I think just long enough to see which side of the ID to scan on their scanner. Scan the ID. In the video, you can clearly see the red light light up on the pad that says they're under 21 and completed the sale anyway. So that's their fourth compliance, compliance check failure in less than 3 years. And revocation proceedings could take place after the most recent violation is adjudicated, which currently is set for December 27th, 2023. So that latest violation from September has not gone through the entire process yet. So it still needs to do that. So at this time, Neighborhood Liquor Mart is attempting to renew again the same license that's under appeal. And I would just say, given the overwhelming evidence demonstrating the lack of care by the applicant, a ruling from the administrative law judge that the applicant is not a person of good moral character, and the continued pattern of compliance check failures, I'm recommending that you deny this application as well.
Thank you. Questions?
Chief, we talk often about the importance of consistency, and could you tell the council just briefly how this recommendation is consistent with the approaches you've taken in other situations?
I think one of the worst things you can do is fail the compliance checks. And I think one of the distinctions I would definitely draw with this business is it's a retailer and not a bar. A bar has a lot of responsibilities. They have to not only check IDs at the door and make sure that people are of age as they come in, but they also have to make sure that people aren't being overserved, that they're not trading IDs, that they're not doing all those other things. A retailer just has to make sure that a person is of age at the point of sale. And that's a pretty low bar, to be honest with you. And I think this is very consistent when we have repeated compliance check failures. I think it's very consistent that we have been recommending not renewing those.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Realistically, Chief, if this goes to the bench trial on the 27th, I'm assuming there's an appeal process again, but maybe not. What is the end of this? Where does that fall?
That's a great question. So I did speak to somebody at ABD the other day. It's been over 2 weeks ago now. Just what is the next steps? So once the latest case is adjudicated, then that gets kicked back to ABD to decide administratively what they would do with that. And so a fourth violation in less than 3 years by code, it prescribes revocation of the license. And that basically means that the license holder cannot hold a license for 2 years, and the physical address cannot have a liquor license for 1 year. I don't know exactly what kicks that process off, but we'll be in contact with them as soon as that case is disposed of, just to see what their next steps are, and then we'll have to figure it out. So I can't give you a concrete answer because I'm not sure how long it takes them to do what they need to do. I'm sure it's not something that happens right away, though. So there's still kind of two processes going on in this. You've got the renewal of the application. You've also got a lot of administrative stuff probably coming up because of this fourth violation.
So, Chief, has the license holder taken any preventative action whatsoever, or has he just been kind of hands-off, whatever?
Well, after the first denial, I think they added some cameras. They added the scanner inside the store. I think what's a little bit frustrating to us is they added a scanner and they're clearly not using it, or they're not using it correctly. Because like I said, in the video that we obtained from the store, you can see that the minor hands the license over, the person scans it very quickly, the red light lights up and still completes the sale. So it really doesn't matter what you put in place if you don't do the bare minimum, and they're not even looking at the licenses.
Can you just, for those who may not be aware, just share that what can they do right now? I mean, they can still operate right now. Is that correct? And
Right.
why?
If you choose to deny the application tonight, they've already filed an appeal on the administrative law judge ruling that we got, whenever that was. I forgot, November 9th or November 8th. So they've already appealed that. And so they will continue to operate regardless of what you do tonight because of that appeal process that they have. So that next step goes to the ABD director. And depending on what happens there, the next step would then be district court. So the process still has a ways to go. It's already taken a year to get from the original denial to a decision on the original denial at the administrative law level. So it takes longer than it should.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just important for people to understand that even with a denial, they still have the right to continue to operate until they exhaust all their opportunities to. So, all right, we'll open up public comment. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this particular topic tonight? Seeing none, we'll close public input.
So I am curious that the applicant didn't come tonight to address council. Was the applicant notified of this hearing tonight or this meeting?
So originally, they had applied for a new 12-month license for the last council meeting 2 weeks ago. And at the last minute, withdrew the new application and instead renewed the old application, which is probably the right way to do it. And at that time, they were told, then you'll be on the next council meeting because they did timely file having the application renewed. So we told them you'll be on the next council meeting.
And have you received any correspondence? I haven't received any correspondence. Have we received any correspondence? Nothing?
I have not, no.
Okay, well, that's helpful.
I'm surprised they're not here. They knew it would be tonight.
Okay.
All right, is there a motion?
I would move that we deny the renewal application for a 12-month license.
Second.
Moved to second. Any closing comments? Roll call.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Very good. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item number 21, staff report regarding short-term housing task force recommendations. And just for those in attendance, this is a staff report. Council will be receiving it, maybe asking questions, having some conversation, and then after that, no action will be taken other than maybe to refer it to a future city council meeting. This is basically our first introduction, and we did get some communication this afternoon from some interested parties that just came in. So I think it's important for council to have the opportunity to consider that, and also anything else might be coming in the next few weeks. So
There'll
anyways,
be an opportunity, Mayor, at some point for people who have comments on this, they'll be able to present those
Absolutely.
at a later
Yep.
time. Okay.
I would anticipate that maybe sometime in January, depending on our agenda. It gets kind of busy, but at that time we'll have opportunities for people to offer public comment on this and work through some potential opportunities. So I'll turn it over to Kelly and Corey.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. So you received a letter from the AADC and the Chamber of Commerce representing a housing task force group this summer, asking for the City Council to look at some issues that might be related to barriers to producing single family or housing in general in the city. And the issue at the time was to consider the change, or not the change, but the cost of development, as well as the types of housing that was being built in the city. And in that letter, it identified for the council some priorities that the task force group identified as both issues for development as well as barriers to that, and offered some suggestions of what might remove certain barriers related to some of those topics. The staff report that was prepared by the team at the city tried to break this down by topics and then give you some possible strategies that addressed certain issues. Not all of the issues had strategies suggested by the task force, and not all of the issues had strategies suggested by city staff as well. So the premise of this is to look at how does housing get developed in the city, and what are our growth goals for the city. Originally, we looked at this through the lens of Plan 2040, which is our comprehensive plan. And if you recall back to about 2 years ago when we adopted the plan, we tagged it as, we used the tagline of for the next 15,000 people. So we wrote a plan that identified how the city could grow and accommodate the development of both commercial and industrial property, but also a variety of housing types over the next 20 years to the year 2040, and about 15,000 people could be housed within those assumptions. And we used a 1.5% growth rate to talk about that kind of growth and how that would lead to development. And to break that all down to what does that mean in an annual basis, it could be, in synopsis, it was an average of approximately 300 housing units could be developed or would average development over 20 years to reach that goal. And that 300 units is a mix of single family homes, duplexes, apartments, whatever type of housing. It wasn't saying that's a precise mix. We did have different assumptions in our housing element to talk about the different types of income levels of people, the housing needs that we need to meet for low and moderate income households, as well as above market or above moderate income levels as well. So we have policies looking at both ownership and rental, as well as income levels in our comp plan. But from a land use perspective, we don't look at that. We look at where are we going to grow and what kind of development can we accommodate as the city. And some of the key elements related to growth is infrastructure. Clearly, you can't build a city without infrastructure. A lot of our job is to manage the infrastructure to the benefit of the taxpayer in the city. So one of the issues that comes about during the discussion of development is not just housing, but also how does infrastructure, how do development regulations apply? So as we look at the strategies in this report, we're talking about literally development costs, incentives to encourage development, but later on we talk about, well, what are strategies to open up more opportunities for development? And that's in that pioneer infrastructure and that oversizing conversation. So as we start with the first issue that's discussed in the letter and then discussed also by staff, we're talking about what are some of the costs for development, and are there incentives that might break that down to encourage additional development? One of the things that we do see in the city is really a new construction cost. It's fairly high. As we identified in the report, it may not be abnormal on a national level, but it is at the upper middle income level as a home. We are not seeing a variety of housing product that's built as starter homes or entry level housing. It's really a target market that's a move-up housing environment in Ames. So you see a lack of differentiation of product in most of our subdivisions that are built. Not all, but overall, you generally see that. And so some of the critiques you see are, well, in other towns, maybe in the Des Moines metro area, you see a greater stratification of housing types. They're not, priced at $200,000. That's not something that exists, but we do see lower price points than what's described in this report. And we also tried to break out to you, just to give you an order of magnitude, what does it really take or what goes into that price of a house? And we used from the task force letter, the price of a $450,000 house as an example spec home that might be on the market right now. So again, not designed as an entry level house, but something that's on the market you could go buy right now, already built. It's got a floor area of 1,500 square feet, probably at least a 2-car garage, possibly a 3-car garage, at least 3 bedrooms, and some finished basement area in that as well. So in our table, we talk about how those costs can be broken out. And when you look at the majority of the cost of the home, it really is the construction cost of the home. Over 60% is attributable to literally the construction of the house itself. Now, the next biggest cost would be the lot, the land itself. And we do have a role in some of that. So the infrastructure cost for creating that subdivision is rolled into a lot cost. So you have land, you have prep, you have design fees, you have grading, you have the water pipe, you have the street, you have other things that all go into those costs. So that starts out the price of the home there. And you can see there that we're looking at about 20% of a house cost is related to lots. So for staff, of things that we might be able to control, there's a portion of that 20% that the city can influence through different mechanisms. We probably can't eliminate all that cost. We have a role with probably in the range of maybe up to 50% of that total lot cost. For some projects, maybe up to 50% of that is infrastructure costs. And again, that's the basic utilities, the basic infrastructure you need for housing to exist in the city. So looking at through that, first thing that we look at is what are ways we could reduce these barriers. And that's kind of the point of the task force letter. We start off with the incentives because that was the request that was prioritized in response to the issues in the task force letter. There are some other issues related to maybe regulatory approach and oversizing that we'll talk about. But the first question is, would the city consider financial incentives to encourage more development? And as we've walked through this with you in the staff report, we've taken a look at this through a tax abatement program. And so for those that haven't followed this in detail, City Council is familiar with this idea. One of the incentives in Iowa is the ability for a city council to grant partial property tax abatement on new improvements. We don't currently do this, so this would be a new thing to the market to add an option for new construction of housing to have part of their property taxes abated. What staff looked at was a proposal where for 5 years, there's a sliding scale of abatement to encourage someone to purchase a home. We have seen this in some of the smaller communities around Ames offer programs like this, but we also know that in the metro area, you don't see all of the larger suburban communities doing this. Some cities do, Des Moines does as well, but you don't see this in Ankeny or Waukee or West Des Moines. They have different housing markets and don't look at this as a tool that they need to use. So in this system, there's a lot of questions. If the council is interested in a tax abatement program, we've bulleted out a number of questions for you. Usually we use incentives and aims for a targeted purpose. We don't just blindly offer them out just to see what works or what is of interest of the city. So the first question is, do you want to look at incentives? And if so, is it for a very fundamental reason of just trying to increase housing starts in the community? Or is there a more targeted purpose to this? Meaning, are there particular price points of interest? Are there particular styles of housing that are of interest to us to prioritize? Should the incentives apply to rental housing as well as ownership housing? There's other features of homes that you could look at. There's sustainability goals from our climate action plan. Would those be prerequisites to get tax abatement? Those are all things that we need to hear tonight or in the future to understand the goals of the council in designing a tax abatement program. If you do look at the tax abatement program, staff suggested that a 5-year program with that sliding scale would add around $12,500 to the home buyer's bank account, I guess, through abated taxes on that typical $450,000 home. So you're seeing, was that roughly 50% of the tax burden? Is that how that works?
60, I think.
60%. Yeah. So there is partial payment to the city in that system, right? So we get some of the taxes over 5 years, but the homeowner would not pay about $12,000 of those taxes. And it would impact the city and the county and DMAC as those taxing entities. The school district is safeguarded in state law now. So Gilbert School District, the Ames School District, United School District, wherever this occurs, they would still receive the property tax revenue from the residential development. So it has a more limited value than it did in the past. This is a recent change from the omnibus budget bill last year that changed how tax abatement works for residential. We are also suggesting that based on our Plan 2040 goals, that we think the priority for an abatement program would be geared towards ownership housing. So we discuss a preference for ownership housing as a larger percentage of the housing built in the city than rental. Part of that is to balance out our current mix of housing. We have more rental housing in the city than we have ownership housing. That's not a shock in a university town such as ourselves. So we did have a goal that we want to see preferences for more ownership opportunities. And secondly, I don't think there's, at least we haven't seen evidence recently that rental housing isn't marketable in the city. Meaning if land's available, it appears that economically rental housing can be built and rented. We have a very low vacancy rate, which is usually correlated to demand. So right now we haven't seen a reason that we need to incent that use. At the same time, I'm not saying there's a lot of vacant high density land out there to build on. We just think that if it is available, the market could produce that housing. The single family has had a lower housing production rate over the last 5 years, and it seems to be more of our preference and priority to encourage that kind of development. So I want to take questions about tax abatement, if there's any to start with before we touch on the other issues.
I have a couple. One was, you mentioned if we did have any criteria that we wanted to think about in terms of targeted purpose. But the other day too, I just want to clarify as well. with the tax abatement, you said that's sort of all or nothing. If they qualify, they qualify, and we can't do that on a sliding scale. So we can't abate more the more they meet a goal, unless the less they meet a goal.
Right. So the question was, could we have like a ladder of measures that if you achieve more in the project, can the house or the homeowner receive more abatement? As I understand it, under current state law, we have a limitation where we can set criteria who is eligible, but we can't change the defined benefit. So at this point, I don't think we can do that. I'm not familiar with anybody that has structured kind of increasing benefits based on accomplishments. There could be other schedules maybe that could be adopted for people to pick, but within one development, if you're eligible, you all get the same benefit.
Yeah. Okay. That was just one question I had the other day that I thought would be good to explain. And then the other one was, you mentioned that you wouldn't necessarily recommend incentivizing rental, but the rental you implied was sort of really high density rental. Is your opinion on that different if we're thinking about a lower density rental situation?
When you say lower density, can you give me a better example?
I guess people renting a home instead of purchasing it.
So a single family dwelling product,
Yeah,
it's
or
rented rather than owned.
or perhaps attached but smaller
But,
than
yeah,
high.
so like 4 or less units in a building.
Yeah.
Approach. I guess we don't see a lot of that construction because it's not easy to build. It's
Yeah.
not like the land is readily available for that use right now. So I don't know that I have not a lot of examples in the city. I would think it's still marketable, but it might be something that if you were looking to encourage a particular building type, then yeah, maybe it fits into that idea of an incentive program.
And could we just exclude like high density rental and?
Yeah. So if council wants to go down this path, you're going to have a couple of choices in how you set up the structure of the program. If it's really basic and it's really wide open on who qualifies, we would establish it as a citywide program. If it's not going to be wide open and it's going to be tailored to a specific area or a specific type of use, then we might have multiple urban revitalization areas and multiple programs that apply either to specific development projects or potentially to citywide. So we'll have to think that through. When we understand what all the goals are, we'll have to come back with if there's more than one urban revite area strategy or how that would really work across the city.
Sure. Thank you.
You might want to mention, so our recommendation was for single family detached and then attached, I'll call them townhouses on separate lots, right?
Yeah.
Then the discussion will be whether you want to include rental to qualify or not in those categories, not for the multifamily apartments. Doesn't mean you can't do it. We're just showing what we said.
Sure.
We're also thinking as a pilot program, you have to decide how long you want to commit to this or just start out for a period of time to see if it actually does what you want it to do, to increase now in the housing starts with the variety. So, we offered maybe a 2-year proposal. It could be extended, could be 3 years to see if it proves out.
Kelly, just as context for this, Ames has an average cost of a new home at approximately $450,000.
Yes.
I would say that is what the builder is building, and that's what they said in the letter.
Okay.
Minimum.
So when we think about these incentives in the context of trying to increase the production of other forms of housing, and we look at the task force members list, how many houses are we actually seeing built now for below 250,000 or between 251 and 350,000 here in Ames? Do we know?
So I think within the last 2 years, for sure, the only houses that are probably in that value range are those built by Habitat for Humanity. Don't believe in the last 2 or 3 years that a market-based builder has offered a house for sale under $300,000. The last development that I know that did that would have been the Smart Home project off of Wilder, where they intentionally designed smaller lots on a private street. And that was targeted at price points under $300,000. And that was a few years ago.
So realistically, are our incentives actually going to get us number one and number two on that list? Whatever those incentives might be? Or is there just not enough, enough interest in building those types of housing, or enough cost for the incentive to really make sense? So if you're saying it's around, what, 12,400-ish, something like that, on a $450,000 property, the incentive must be lower for these less expensive properties.
So percentage wise, it's the same. It's just the absolute dollar value will be less. Yeah. I think the unknown question for us, especially with the development community, is they identified those as the top priorities, right? Price points under 350. They didn't clearly articulate in their letter how tax abatement would yield that construction. So theoretically, we've mitigated some risk in a different product type, and they're willing to take that on, and that it would be somehow easier to build. It doesn't change the financing of the project, because this incentive doesn't go to the builder. It only goes to the buyer. So I think it is a little unclear how we would yield those priorities that are identified in the letter with tax abatement. Other than indirectly, it encourages the builder to possibly take on different project types. And I think we did talk about, if you think about the difference between what lots have been platted but not built on, so our existing subdivisions, versus what might be platted next year if this program is available, I don't think you'll see any lower priced houses on existing lots, because they're already developed with a base cost, and they're larger. They're not going to scale to a smaller house typically. So I think that's really hard for us to forecast it if we adopt this. Would a developer come in with a different plan than we would have otherwise seen in the next 9 months to build a subdivision with lower price housing?
Kelly, going back to the your smart home example, was that 4 years ago? That was pre-COVID.
Yeah, I want to say it was like maybe 2020, so maybe just over 3 years ago.
Is that? I think that some of those houses were like in the high $200,000 range.
In the mid twos is where they started.
So is that model replicable in other developments today, in your opinion? And if so, what would that look like?
Yeah, so one thing we did 2 years ago, right after the smart home project, was we did create the PUD ordinance. And one of the goals of that was to facilitate small lot development. So if somebody really wanted to do like a 3,000 square foot lot with a detached home and build a 1,200 square foot home or 1,400 square foot home, you could do that and not have to worry about what regular base zoning required. So we have a tool that's there. That project can be replicated if somebody wanted to put that into the market.
So how about they have a private, you mentioned they have a private street versus a public street. How about utilities? Were utilities already there and accessible, or do they have to put it? I'm trying to tease out your point on the, one of the options is potentially trying to, we could affect would be the lot price.
Mm-hmm.
And that you mentioned previously.
So in that case, the overall Sunset Ridge subdivision had already taken on what we would discuss as pioneer infrastructure or oversizing. That project was a remnant 2-ish acre lot that could just hook into the water and sewer that was already in Wilder and Lincoln Way and just run the normal main and services off of it. So it did not have to do any offsite improvements.
I think you mentioned the lot size was smaller. So apparently there were certainly some aspects that, back to the question, is there any way that could be replicated? I know that COVID, I mean, construction prices have shot up significantly. But I'm just wondering if there's any lessons that we can learn from what was done there that a developer would be interested in pursuing to try and get into this lower price point.
So one thing we know from that project, it was a specialty of a development group that's in the metro area. It wasn't done by a local developer. So that smart home product, and it's smart home for a marketing tag, that's what they market. They do it other places. So they're very familiar with the product. They understand the efficiencies of the approach. They build multiple houses at once. They're not custom built. So there's a whole strategy about production building that lowers that housing cost. So that particular model has a lot of elements to it that we haven't seen the local builders do here, and only seen metro builders take that kind of approach.
Well, it's just if council's objective and goal is to really try and get into that lower price point, and the AEDC report clearly established that was a high priority, it would seem, since we had a successful project come in, I think those units got snapped up right away, I believe, too. So there's
I think it's a fairly successful project. And the homes were much smaller than 1,500 square feet than a partial basement. We were talking between 1,000 and 1,200 square feet with possibly a partial basement. So hundreds of feet less saves $60,000 to $100,000 in construction costs.
Point being is, if those are built and if there was half of them were still empty, then you say, well, it wasn't very successful because people weren't interested, but they're all gone. I mean, they're all sold. So my point being is that'd be an intriguing thing maybe early next year to kind of delve into more and find out, okay, what is, quote, the secret sauce in that, and see if more of that can be done in certain areas for sake of discussion. I don't know, but I know you have private streets, so I don't think they have curb and gutter. It's probably not as wide, parking, and it's not a through street. So I mean, the point is that there's things that have to be teased out of the overall model. But anyway, it's just and also it's a cul-de-sac.
Yeah, it's a dead end street.
Dead end street, actually.
Yeah, so it's private.
So I mean, it's not being critical. It's just there's something here that was maybe worth looking at. That's all. Thank you. Anybody else have questions for Kelly on this first item?
I've just got a couple, Kelly. First, just as a general premise, the material is very helpful. I encourage people to take a look at the staff report. And one thing, this is a glorious point, we're really far behind our target. If we're trying to hit 300 homes or housing units a year, my understanding is our housing starts are somewhere around 30 to 40 right now. Am I right about that?
I had the report ran yesterday where it's 62 year to date.
Oh, well.
As of yesterday.
Yeah. So, but my understanding is that Ankeny is 10 times that number, Waukee is 10 times that number. And so this is so important for our schools. We want to have kids in our schools. We've got to build housing for our businesses to have places for their employees to live. It's just so important for our growth of our community. But I had one question from the report, if you could speak to, you note, this is on, I'm not sure what page number, but it says it should be noted the review of other cities in Iowa indicates that tax abatement and direct payment incentives are offered more often by the smaller communities than the larger growing communities such as Ankeny, Waukee, and West Des Moines. This could signal that other factors such as competition and so on are more impactful than tax abatement. So as we think about the different levers that we could consider, why is tax abatement sort of the first go-to?
Honestly, that's a question for the task force. They're the ones that recommended that as an option. Our understanding is it encourages investment and faster sales, which allows for them to take on more projects or to make more investments because they're reaping their rewards quicker. So that's indirectly, they're hoping they sell quicker because basically it's on sale for buying this now, and they'll sell it quicker and reinvest that money into a project. That's the best understanding that I have of it.
And so
I think there's a perception too that to the policymakers, it's an easier sell because it's less, right? We're not shelling out millions of dollars in taxpayer funds up front for something. There's less of a risk to the city.
Yep. So, but for the task force recommendation, all things equal, would that be your first recommendation to us, or would you be making recommendations for other tools for addressing the housing shortage?
I mean, our first recommendation, which we haven't got to under Pioneer Infrastructure, is to invest in Plan 2040 and open up more land. And that's what City Council has chosen to do over the last 2 years of the CIP, is to deploy water and sewer infrastructure to open up more land so that the market can build more housing. I think long-term, that's a much bigger impact than any tax abatement program.
Okay, and that's a helpful point. One of the things that I am interested is we still have some lots, infill lots in the community. Would those infill lots be eligible for an abatement like this, or would it be only for new developments?
So I think that's yet to be determined. We talk about if it's really generic criteria about new construction in the year 2024 on an existing vacant lot, that could be citywide and capture those. If we end up defining it more on a project base because we have expectations for some new subdivision to do something specific, then we would probably leave those handful of infill lots behind because it wouldn't be a city program. It would be a development-based program.
Okay. And so there's a lot to think through there. One just sort of bookmark I would put in this, if we decide to do some kind of infill, I would want to make sure that we don't actually incentivize tearing down existing housing to take advantage of this. So it would be a situation where it would need to be a vacant lot at a certain time to take advantage of this. Last thing I want to do is incentivize tearing down our existing housing stock that we really need to take care of. And then the final question I had, and this is just sort of a conceptual level. I mean, this is new for us. So I've served for 10 years. We've not done things like this before. And let me articulate a question that is in the minds of some of our residents. They would say, we understand the cost benefit analysis of building a road. We invest public dollars and there's a clear public benefit. The correlation is clear. But if we use an abatement program like this, the individual homeowners get the initial benefit of that abatement. But what's in it for us? How do we as a community benefit from an abatement program like this? And I'm supportive of this, but I'm asking this because I know there are people who would want us to ask that question. And could you give an answer to council from your perspective?
I think it's kind of hard to answer. And the only thing I can offer is that if you truly saw a substantial increase in housing starts because you think the housing starts is very beneficial to the community, that's the only way that I can imagine that you would measure success. Is if it's the same number of houses, then it's not successful, right? Because we didn't accomplish anything. They would have been built anyways without the incentive. And other than that, I'm not sure how to articulate the clear, tangible benefit of an abatement program.
And that's a helpful data point. And so as we think about, we're here today in 2023, let's say we look back in this 2 years from now, what kind of scorecards should we be looking at to ask the question, was this successful? So should we be looking at number of housing starts? Are there any other benchmarks that you would want us to be looking at to try to measure, was this beneficial to the community?
We can't just look at number of housing starts, it's a variety of homes. So the differential in housing costs is what you want too, right?
Oh, I think so.
So it's just not numbers, because you could have, $500,000 homes, but I hear you saying you want diversity of housing, so affordable at different levels. So you want to look at the price range of those homes too, variety in price range, not just the total number, right?
But if, to Bronwyn's point, if the tax abatement is uniform regardless of whether it is a larger house or a more medium price point, how is that incentivizing the lower price point?
Certainly not guaranteeing it. You're right. You're not directing that incentive to an area you have a higher priority on. You're trusting, and that's why we're going to test this. You're trusting it. If you give it on whole houses, the developers are going to build those less costly houses too. I'm sure it's going to happen.
I think that's not entirely accurate. Can you again clarify? You can set thresholds.
We could set a threshold of a cap. I just can't step up the benefit within the same area. So we could just say it's under $400,000 are the only homes that benefit.
Right.
One simple criteria. We could do that.
So you're not incentivizing
I'm assuming you meant for all, to incentivize for all.
I am.
Yeah, see that.
But
you can't guarantee that.
Yeah, so this is helpful. So and we don't have to work through all this tonight, but I would like to look back on this 2 years from now and say, there's some improvements that we've seen. And to your point, if we're still in the same situation where we're building less than 75 houses a year, and I think we haven't done the community a good service. I don't know this was worth it. But I know when I drive through Ankeny and I see some of the Des Moines Metro development that's going on, we've got to do something different than what we're doing. So status quo is not working, and so I'm very supportive of looking at a variety of different levers to achieve this goal. Thanks for those answers.
You asked the question, how do you measure the benefits? I think you answered your own question earlier. Benefits to the school system, benefits to the workforce. It's going to increase economic activity in terms of shopping and eventually, and it's not 100% tax payment. I mean, it's a graded one. A gradation one too. So I do think that you've already were on to the answers of how do what would be the benefits. And the other thing too is I think we have to be careful that we're not comparing ourselves to the Ankenys and the Waukees. The staff report that you were quoting, Tim, said, that this could signal that other factors such as competition, location, or other amenities present in these larger cities are more impactful than tax abatement incentives in creating a market for the new houses.
Correct.
So we look at where Ankeny, and I'm not saying they're the poster child, but you mentioned that they're building all these houses. Well, they also happen to be immediately proximate to Des Moines. They have significant capital investments going on with Prairie Trail and other things. Waukee I think is one of the fastest growing cities, not only in Iowa, but I think it's maybe even in the nation. It's just they're just going nuts. And who's building a new high school every few years? I mean, it's crazy. My point being is that this is not saying we're not a great community. We are a great community. It's just more or less, I don't know that we can necessarily compare their numbers to our numbers and say we're just not keeping up. I think there's factors that enter into it that staff pointed out that need to be taken into consideration. So we don't feel like we're just all of a sudden we're way behind the 8 ball. I think it's more or less how are we hitting our Ames 2040 plan? How are we measuring that? What's the impact on?
Yeah, and I think all of that's fair. We could also point to Huxley is eating our lunch. Huxley, of all places. This is amazing.
Bondurant. I mean, you can name other small towns that are
Right. So I think your point's well taken with respect to the metro, but even Huxley is booming. So I look forward to hearing other thoughts and learning, but I'm excited about doing something.
All right, let's move on to the next one, Kelly.
Oh yeah. So after the conversation on incentives, the next issue to talk about was the request for support for the infrastructure deployment. And so we've broken that into 2 types of categories. We have pioneer infrastructure, which we're defining as that real core infrastructure necessary to probably fill gaps to get to a development site. And we have some good examples of that. We recently committed to extending the sanitary sewer from Dayton Avenue under I-35 to get to our planned commercial and industrial area on the east side of I-35. That was a large gap. It was pretty much too large of an undertaking for a developer to take on. We had always expected someone else to make that extension. City Council chose to do that to allow for and facilitate that commercial development over there. So that's a true gap. If not for the city, it was highly unlikely for that to ever get done. Too much time, a lot of costs, just not something you'd look at. So we want to look at the pioneer infrastructure that is necessary to support our growth areas. We're recommending that we as the city support Plan 2040 through the deployment of that pioneer infrastructure. And as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, you have started that practice with some of the spending of ARPA money for water and sewer projects. I think as we talked about this in-house, the issue that will be a struggle for us is probably the paving of gravel roads. On when and how that happens. When you see some development occur, you need paved access, and it might be a stretch of road that doesn't connect to another road. And where do we get involved in that? So I think we want to have a policy that says the city is interested in doing that, but there are some qualifications. We don't have unlimited funds. Timing is a big issue to the city. It doesn't mean we won't use an assessment district approach or a connection fee approach to help share costs. I think one of the biggest problems for developers is when you're first in and we look at them and go, we really need this to be done. I know another 1,000 acres is going to benefit from it, but you need it, so you got to build it. The connection district and the assessment options help spread that more fairly out over time. Now we have to shoulder that. We have some carrying costs there, but it does help the developer a lot. They really, really struggle with the idea of putting in infrastructure that they don't necessarily completely benefit from. So that pioneer policy would be beneficial for us to continue for the build out of our growth areas. And we do need to have some timing behind that to make sure the budget makes sense. We want to make sure that the development financially makes sense too. We've talked about this also. Would we spend $2 million to pave a road to get to a 30 house development? I don't know if that'd be our first choice. Maybe it would be because we know something else is going to come along, but maybe it's not if we're not sure that anything's going to follow that. So we have to have some latitude here. And the best that we can do as a city is commit to a council policy to look at that and to program infrastructure through our CIP program. In the past, there was less of a commitment. It was more, or currently I should say, Plan 2040 identifies these things are necessary for our growth areas, but it makes no commitment to funding. So we did that on purpose. We didn't have a plan for funding. We wanted to make that discretionary by the council at the time those things were coming in. So this is suggesting that council would adopt more of a firm policy that we would do that, subject to the things that we just talked about. So is there any questions about pioneer infrastructure before we talk about oversizing?
Quick question. How much of the developer reaction to what they currently have to do is a perception of this being unfair or it's laying too much of a financial burden on them? And how much of it is an actuality?
Well, it's definitely in some cases a financial burden that does not let the project start. That is an absolute truth. So there's I really wish I didn't have to do this, but if they're still making money, they're probably going to do it, right? But if it makes it a project that does not pencil, then we know there's a tangible result of that expectation is stopping the project from happening. And we've seen that. We know that there's some projects that were delayed. I mean, the 13th Street Dayton sewer, the developer was very hesitant to commit to doing that. They didn't have enough assurances on their side to take that on. So therefore they didn't go forward themselves. We know that maybe it would have worked, but it was too much of a deterrent for them. We've also seen that for some of for the Hayden Preserve development up north off of Hyde Avenue, that they have some long-term infrastructure requirements that have been in their development agreements for a while, and it hasn't penciled out for it either. So it is real on certain sites.
Corey, I have a question for you. You need something to talk about tonight. So I have
Coming up later too.
Okay, I have a question for you then. So this is new for us to lay these kinds of projects into our CIP. And so could you give us a high level perspective on the impacts of us inserting these projects now into our CIP and the impacts on other goals and priorities of the city?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is we're in the process of budgeting right now, and we're seeing increased cost of borrowing. These large infrastructure costs are not going to be cash funded in all likelihood. We just did our recent GO issuance at 4%, and that's for non-utility related debt. So as Kelly mentioned, they'd have to be layered in. There'd be probably significant impact potentially on utility rates, which would largely fund those projects. There's just not a simple solution in terms of financing, honestly. And as borrowing costs go up, we're really not eligible for 2% borrowing anymore. Those days are officially over. So, it'd have to be some prioritization in terms of planning for capital projects.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on this one? All right.
So then we get to oversizing. So oversizing is the concept that some of the infrastructure needs to be built to serve others beyond the scope of this project. So the great example is I need a 12-inch water line to serve the larger growth area, whereas the typical water line is 8 inches. So in that case, our current policy or our past policy, depending on where you're in the city, you as the developer had to pick up that extra cost. We had some targeted areas where we would possibly share in oversizing, we're suggesting, again, much like Pioneer Infrastructure, that we look at more of an affirming policy that we would participate in oversizing. So that would be things of extra depth, extra diameter, that incremental cost. So we're trying to be cost neutral here. We're trying to make sure the developer's not having an extra cost, but we're also not necessarily giving them an incentive there. We're just trying to remove an extra cost that they otherwise would have had. Now, when we look at incentivizing, oversizing, there's two parts of this. We are really talking about not the infrastructure, same with Pioneer Infrastructure, not the infrastructure that it must be built to serve your project within your project, including things that would only happen if you built your project, like in a deceleration or a turn lane to get into your main street. That's not Pioneer Infrastructure. That's not oversizing. That is a development-based cost. If the road is oversized to go through your project, that's different. Now that's oversizing. We're building a 31-foot wide street for a collector street instead of a 26-foot wide street. Now it's an oversizing cost because that collector street is going to serve more. And then there's a discussion there about how those costs are shared. The other tricky thing with oversizing is, as we identify in the report, under state law, we just can't provide cash to the developer for our share. We end up having to negotiate offsetting projects as the best way to do it. That's the best way to allow the developer to keep their typical lower costs segregated from our typically higher cost projects. We can take cash from a developer and do the project, but that's not commonly how we did it. We did do this in North Sunset Ridge, where we did share in the cost of a sewer extension, where Hunziker gave us funds to go along with our planned infrastructure project. Otherwise, we have to find offsetting projects to make that work. We can't just contribute at that time. So in the past, what we've done, the main street might get built by the developer. Then in phase 2, we'll build 2 blocks of street to pick up our share of what that overall cost was in the project. So it's a little bit harder to figure out. You do have to do that, and you end up negotiating that a little bit on each development project to try and figure out those offsetting projects. Now, the other part of this that's discussed in here is how do you deal with traffic impacts? Traffic impacts are kind of fluid in the sense that they're typically non-existent until development occurs, and there's incremental share that usually is distributed amongst multiple properties. Now, if your intersection is the one causing that signal to turn into your project, that's easy to identify, and that's probably being assigned to your cost. But if we're talking about impacts to streets and intersections that are further away from the project, and you're contributing 100 cars to an intersection that has 3,000 cars going through it, typically we've looked at if you've triggered the impact, you need to pay for the impact. And this gets back to, well, how is that? Well, that seems fair, except for thousands of other people are benefiting from it and didn't pay for it. So that gets to that question, well, how do you distribute costs more fairly? So what we are proposing is the city, through a traffic study, would look at proportional costs. So if a mitigation measure is triggered, it's not something that's anticipated already by the city, we would look for a cost contribution. So what does that mean? It helps the developer pay for something. It delays the implementation of that infrastructure because the city is now holding the funds and we're deciding when to spend it. And if other people don't come along to contribute, then the city might have to pick up the whole cost of that infrastructure. So when North Growth was done, we did take some proportional costs from the 3 major developers out there to do infrastructure. So they paid their share, but the city's is left holding the increased costs over time to get that done. So we end up participating in that project. So it isn't necessarily lowering again the cost of developer, it's more fairly distributing the cost, but the city is stepping in to get that project done eventually as an oversizing project. So those policies are pretty consistent with how many cities approach this issue. The task force did ask for more. They were asking probably for commitments of more infrastructure being financed or supported by the city. Really anything along the perimeter being a city supported cost. We haven't landed there that's a fair way of looking at those costs. So we're looking more at the broader picture than just the individual frontages or the individual mains that are going through the projects. So any question on oversizing?
Kelly, you've provided examples of other cities and some of the other areas. Could you speak to the issue of oversizing? Do you know how other cities are approaching this subject? Is there best practices for us to consider?
So I think it's a combination. Most cities are kind of merging the idea of pioneer infrastructure and oversizing together. So I think connection districts are pretty common. So if it's going to be an oversized pipe, one way you help the developers, the city again finances the project, and they just pay for their share. So that would be like the East Industrial water and sewer extensions we did. So no one person had to shoulder that cost. We'll get repaid with interest. So someday we're made whole. It'll just be a while. So a lot of cities do that to try to deal with oversizing. So if you need that 16-inch sewer line, you can distribute those costs to everybody, and then the city eventually gets repaid. I think someone in the pioneer infrastructure, that is not uncommon for a walk here in Ankeny to go put the 2 lanes of the road in, and then that opens up a section of land. And then when the subdivision comes in, they make their intersection improvements. They do the stuff on the inside. And so that's really common to see that approach. If you're very confident you're going to see development come in, they do use assessment districts. They do use connection districts in some of these other towns as well. Just again, to try to recoup those costs. So it's not purely the burden of the existing taxpayer.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
So moving through to the end here of actions, we start to talk about less about incentives and other process-oriented issues. If you're familiar with city staff, with every project that comes before you, there's a committee of affected departments called Development Review Committee. So you have inspections, public works, engineering, public works, transportation, planning and housing, Ames Electric, parks and recreation, fire, are all present to review a project for conformance to our development standards. And so when you get a project, it's been reviewed by all of your staff, we are saying, yep, it meets city code. You make the final decision if it meets the overall criteria. So the DRC process, Steve is suggesting that just to make sure that we are operating in the best customer service friendly way we can put a third party in there. So Brian Phillips is going to be assigned more as a facilitator. Not that anybody in DRC wasn't doing what they're supposed to do, but just to, hey, let's open up a new relationship channel and have another person there to see how the activities go, just to build more relationships if that's what's necessary in DRC. So we're trying to ensure that we're giving the best customer service we can to help those projects get through. There are suggestions about reporting on building permits issued, times for review of permits. We can definitely create a quarterly permit report system if that's of interest to people to understand what applications are going through DRC. That's all public information, so that's not a big deal for us to have to put that together. So we can commit to do that. So if people need to see kind of how things are going through the system and what's happening, that's not hard for us to do. One issue that council has already initiated but hasn't taken final action on is to look at modifying some of the development standards, so specifically flexibility for zoning. I think when this first came up, we probably weren't thinking about housing per se. We're probably thinking more about commercial sites, but you did charge us with in planning to come back and talk about zoning issues related to development. And I did mention there are certain subdivision standards, the 10% open space set aside, the block length requirements we have. Those are things that commonly come up in single family developments that at times are complicated or a controversy through the DRC process to resolve. And that's something that we can come back and it could lower costs of development. If we change how our street patterns are done, it can lower the cost of development. It all kind of depends on that particular site. So that's something we're coming back to you on. We don't need a referral on that. You've already asked for that report later in January is I think the target for that to come back to you. And then we did talk, there was a suggestion about use of affordable housing funds. And as you recall, we have federal housing funds that we use in the city. We have a small allocation of home funds, which can be used for actual construction. And then we have CDBG funds that can be used for infrastructure and housing assistance programs and removal of blight. We have a federally designed program that we have to work through to spend these funds. And it just so happens we're at the perfect time to talk about this idea. This winter, you have to go through the process of adopting a new 5-year housing plan called the Consolidated Plan. So whether this referral had come to us or not in the task force, you're going to be charged with city council to take public input and give direction to council, have council give direction to staff about formulating that next 5-year plan. And then we implement the 5-year plan on 1-year action plans. So if we have targets for producing housing, or we have targets for assisting households in rental assistance or first-time homebuyer funds, those kinds of ideas, those are strategies that come through the 5-year plan. And then on an annual basis, they're directed to staff in that action plan. So again, no referral is needed here. We think that you're best suited to deal with this. It'll be in February and March where you'll have to look at this to look at the data that's been collected. So we do have to produce background information. We have to use HUD's data for this, identify impediments, identify the needs in the community, and then council gets to identify the actions that we'll follow through. So we think, again, we don't need to do anything with this tonight, but it will be coming to you regardless. And I think action step 3, we do already have a business coordinator. It's someone that can roll into some of their duties, outreach and monitoring of different activities for supportive housing in the area. Then we get to land costs, which is unfortunately no strategy was identified either by the task force or by the city as a way of necessarily lowering land costs at the beginning of the process. The best strategy that we have is, again, to open up as much land as possible so the market is competitive. And that's where we fall back into the Ames Plan 2040 growth plans, as well as the infrastructure discussion that we already had. And there's no additional measures that we're outlining in relation to land costs at this point. So for next steps,
The last barrier.
I'm sorry, what was that?
One more barrier.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Developers.
And again, we've talked about this a little bit. What's the competition in the community? What derives that variety of housing products? We don't have a lot of out of town builders that have come, especially to build single family homes. We have student housing projects that regional and national builders have shown up to build. They've been happy to come to town and build their products here. It's the single family developers that we, on a rare occasion, have them do subdivisions, but we don't see it regularly occur. It's not, again, something that the task force was able to identify necessarily a way to increase competition, and city staff also didn't have a solution that was obvious, other than, again, expanding market options is the best that it seems that we can do as the city to do that.
One category wasn't included, just some of our current codes that perhaps are impediments or could be changed to help us achieve our goals. And I know there's been discussion to relook at maybe our conservation subdivision, because we have some large tracts of land that are up in the north which already have infrastructure in place we could look at. And also, Kelly will tell you about cul-de-sacs. You know, cul-de-sacs might be more attractive to developers, help them get more density, our ability to sell the houses quicker. We have changed our code many years ago to try to limit those, not eliminate them, but limit those. So we haven't talked about, are there other changes in the codes we can make that can help facilitate achieving our goals? Just throw those two out there, maybe others. The report didn't speak to that, is what I'm saying. You know, you've heard that from commercial areas on reducing parking, let's say. Well, there may be some issues dealing with single family development and subdivisions that maybe could change. Not shifting costs or incentivizing, but doing away with some of the requirements altogether. Everyone saves.
Have we or may we involve developers not from Ames in this discussion to find out what they think of our processes or what it would take and incentives? I mean, we're getting a lot of information from the community that's already here, but that doesn't expand the number of developers who might come to Ames. And it just seems like if there were a way to capture that input on what might be standing in the way of them coming to do projects in Ames, it could be helpful. But I don't know whether that is easy to do.
It's not, because they have to take time away from their business for something that isn't a project of theirs. So the best communication I have is with the Hayden Preserve development team. We've been in contact multiple times over the last year and a half, and they give you a sense of ideas of what they've done in other places, what they think their concerns are here. But if I was to call up, I don't know, whatever developer in Waukee and say, have you ever looked at Ames? There's not much of a reason for them to give me much time on that topic. So maybe there's a couple of conduits of communication through ADC and some other things where that might be possible, but I wouldn't have high hopes of getting their insights into our market if they aren't building here.
It just feels like we're kind of in an echo chamber, you know, getting input from the people who are already here. So I don't know. I mean, obviously it's not an easy thing to do if they aren't already looking at Ames.
I wondered too if having conversation with some area businesses in terms of understanding the importance and what role they are currently playing in ensuring that their workers have housing here. I know that there are some companies that are helping to subsidize housing for their employees. So perhaps that's a conversation that can help us leverage additional resources in some ways, even if it's their voices.
Okay, anything else? All right, so as mentioned at the beginning, we're gonna, council take this under advisement and then digest the feedback we've gotten from other people, and I believe some others want to provide more information as well too. So bring this to put this on a future agenda. When you anticipate would be sometime in January, Steve?
Hopefully, yeah, maybe the second week of January. We'll see we got a lot of stuff coming on.
Right. So, all right.
Thank you.
Very good. We'll move on to item number 22, hearing on text amendments to code regarding ADUs. Kelly?
All right, good evening. I think Eloise is here to support me as we get through this as well. So you've been talking about ADUs for just over 6 months in terms of, is that something that's of interest to Ames, and is something that's going to fit in Ames? So in October, you received the public feedback on the draft standards, which in general allow for up to a 900 square foot accessory dwelling to be built if the property is a single family home and the owner of the property resides at that location. The accessory dwelling unit would also be limited to 1 bedroom. It would have to include the provision of a parking space. So if you already have it on your site, so you already have 3 spaces on your property, you don't have to build another one. But if you do not have all of the required parking, you would have to construct parking with that new ADU. In general, we're treating the ADU the same as any other accessory building. So the size limit, the setbacks, lot coverage, all of those factors are applied uniformly to this building as well as to any other type of accessory building. In October, when we kind of reviewed that public feedback with you, it seemed that you had similar responses on the side of this is too restrictive to this is too permissive to it seems just right. So at that point, council didn't see a strong push to change any one standard one direction or another. So you charged us to move forward with essentially those draft standards that we identified back in October. So we've prepared the amendments to Chapter 29 in accordance with those draft standards. We also have companion changes to Chapter 13 tonight, which is the rental code. We talked a little bit about this in October, that the near campus neighborhoods, how would we treat this new accessory structure in relation to the bedroom count restrictions? So we did give you language to make it very clear now that the 2018 bedroom cap applies to any structure, to all structures on the property, whether it's a modification in addition to or new construction, including an ADU. So what that means is I might have a 3-bedroom house. I can still build an ADU, but it would not allow me to be considered a 4-bedroom house if I was to rent something on that property. So that works pretty well in terms of consistency with what the expectations were. The other key thing in the rental code is that it must be owner occupied. And you cannot, once you have an ADU, register the property as a rental, even one of the units, if the owner is not present. So that is that commitment that we made earlier in the process, that not only do you have to be the owner to get the building permit, but you have to be an owner on site if you're ever to receive, ever to register the property for rental purposes. I did leave a memo on the dais and about some little questions that we did hear about today in relation to accessory buildings. I did want to touch on that. There's 2 issues. We consider this an accessory use, and there is a section in the code that says accessory uses are limited to 25% of the principal use. That is not something that we had ever articulated or intended to be applied to this. We talked about 900 square feet being that maximum, not 25% of the house. And that has not been applied to other accessory buildings. So that was why we did not think of that being the situation. So if council, either wants that to be restricted or wants it to be very clear it's not restricted. I gave you some language there that could be added tonight to the ordinance, or it could be left as is, knowing that the city staff would not enforce it that way. And then the second issue relates to guest lodging, or what many people think of as Airbnbs. We allow for Airbnbs on any property that has been registered for rental purposes. So if I live on this property and I register my property to be a rental, I can do short-term lodging in the ADU. That's going to be allowed because I've registered that thing as that unit as a rental. There is an option for a different version that we call a hosted home share, or a home share, which means the owner is present on site. It's not absentee. And the way it's currently written, you can only take advantage of that if it's in the dwelling that the owner lives in. And so that memo articulates that if nothing changes in the code, that is how that would be, meaning I can't use the ADU for Airbnb purposes. I can if I register my property as a rental, but not through those limited licensing options where you don't make it a rental property. So again, if you want to clarify that in any direction, I gave you some language to make it clear that that doesn't apply. Or if you want it to apply, if you want it to apply, I'm not sure what I'm referring to. If you want to continue to not allow the ADU to be used as an Airbnb unless it's registered as a rental, no change is necessary. If you want to allow it to be used for Airbnb purposes as short-term lodging, as guest lodging, you would need to make that edit that I put in the memo. So they're minor issues. They don't really fundamentally change things, but they were questions we had from a resident today about how that works. And then I think the last thing to discuss again about the rental code is the idea of an owner-occupied unit and the roomer option that exists there. So we do allow in our rental code owners of a home that are family members plus one roomer that would not be a family member to be exempt from the rental code, whether you're paying rent or not. We're saying the owner-occupied definition applies to the property. So the roomer exemption and the relationship of your family members can and are allowed to occur within both dwellings, and you don't have to register it as a rental. If you have two roomers, you have to register it as a rental. If you have non-family members present, it's a rental just like everywhere else. So is there any questions about any of these code changes or any of the new language that we've discussed? And as Eloise said to me quietly right there, there's also edits to the historic preservation chapter 31, which facilitate the design review process that goes through ADUs. HPC looks at new construction. We wanted to clarify that certain rules that were meant really for principal dwellings didn't apply to accessory buildings. And then if you convert a contributing garage in Old Town, that's also subject to review. So that idea that a contributing garage is an historic garage, it's been a garage, you're probably gonna have to alter that structure to make it residential from being a utility structure. We want to make sure that HPC is looking at that to make sure that they still feel like it's maintaining its historic integrity if you were to convert it. So fundamentally, it's to ease the ability for accessory unit to be built in the historic district, but also maintain those compatibility expectations.
The last thing you said is it's already taken care of in the text that's included in the packet, correct? There's no changes necessary for the historic district.
That is part of the ordinance that's in the packet, correct?
That's why I interpreted the way that it's presented.
So
I just didn't know if there's something else we needed to change.
Yep. So it's 29, 31, and 13 are the three chapters that are in the ordinance. The only thing that the memo is the only additional language that if you were interested in.
If
altering.
desired.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Questions?
So I have a few questions, Kelly, based on conversations that I've had with constituents in the last couple days. One of those questions relates to the maximum size, which is 900 square feet as currently written, and the number of bedrooms allowed. So we have up to a 900 square foot ADU that may have one bedroom, right? And what I'm seeing on page 189 of the packet is that any living area that is separated from the kitchen, living room, or bathroom will likely meet the definition of a bedroom and additional rooms therefore will not be permitted, including basements and second floors, when a bedroom already exists on the main level. So I was trying to figure out what that configuration does for this ADU. And am I picturing this correctly, that it's probably relatively open plan, or that it's got a huge living room and a bedroom and the kitchen and bathroom?
So you're saying if someone maximizes the 900 square feet,
Yeah.
how is that space going to get used? I would agree that you're probably in a very large open kitchen, living room area, and then your bathroom and your bedroom, whatever size you want to use that for.
So the question that I received was, does it make sense to allow 900 square feet and only one bedroom? Or are those two things not incompatible, but oddly paired with each other? Or would it make more sense to have a smaller unit and say it's a one bedroom unit? Or it's a 900 square foot unit, but you can have two bedrooms?
No.
And I explained about the near campus issues of rental. And so that explains the 200 or the two bedroom option not being something that we wanted. But I'm still fixated on the fact that we have some of these smaller homes in these neighborhoods that are 900 square feet or less that have, two bedrooms in them. And so basically we're allowing the building of another house. And so all of this is going through my head. I'm not sure I see the logic of 900 square feet with one bedroom. If we're also then going to say, and you really can't have an upstairs or a basement because you've already got the bedroom, and you might cheat and use the upstairs or the basement as a bedroom.
So if you don't put the separate room on the main floor, the basement can be the bedroom, or the second floor can, right? So you could just have kitchen, bathroom, living area on the main floor, and if you want a large bedroom that's your basement, that's fine. I'm just saying that if you've created an exclusive room as a bedroom on your main floor, you just can't have other living area in that building.
The other factor, I think, is that if you're allowing conversion of a garage, there may be a garage is 30 foot by 30 foot.
So let's go back to why it's 900.
All of a sudden you can't, then if you say you want to be 720, maybe some garages can't be converted because they actually are larger than what that square footage. So, I mean, it's kind of like there's this yin and yang kind of going on.
Yeah, I would say if you go back to how we started, we didn't derive our standards from what's the best ADU. We said, how can we utilize our current accessory building standards and allow for ADUs within that development envelope? So the 900 square feet, certainly you could have more than one bedroom in that, but also the one bedroom was a compromise on the level of intensity of use. And we're not saying you have to build 900 feet. If that's a waste of space, you don't do it.
Might already have an accessory building that's 900 square feet, and that's why we're going with that. But I don't think those two are conflicting thoughts. I mean, I get where you're coming from, but I do think it's the best compromise we can achieve.
Yeah, and it's not so much where I'm coming from. It was the question that was put to me.
Sure.
Although I still think 900 is huge, but it makes sense if someone already has a very large garage and they want to turn it into an
So
ADU.
I just want to clarify, since this is being thrown out there, that if you happen to have a 500 square foot house, you can't build a 900 square foot ADU. It still must be subordinate to the principal structure. That is a requirement. So sorry, that's just a basic accessory building requirement. It's not that 25% that I was talking about. So if you truly have a super small house, you can't build a 900 square foot.
So then the other question is about the 2018 number of bedrooms in the near campus neighborhoods. I didn't realize that regardless of modifications to a structure, additions to a structure, or construction of a new ADU did not increase the bedroom count for purposes of calculating maximum occupancy. So I'm trying to understand that one. I'm assuming it means that if you own the home and you move into the ADU, you may rent the other bedrooms in the house. But if you are already renting rooms in the house where you live, you can't add another bedroom in the ADU. So you really can't do an ADU. Is that?
No, so, sorry, that's not what I believe the intent was of the regulation when it was originally written, nor how this is. Essentially, you can make modifications to your home and add bedrooms. You can take your 3-bedroom house to a 6-bedroom house. You will just never be licensed to have more than 3 adults in that house if you were to ever register it. So this was the compromise that an owner could make improvements to their home that's going to benefit their family, but it doesn't allow for an absentee investor to try to expand occupancy for rental purposes in an existing structure. So there's nothing prohibiting me from adding a bedroom to my home. It's just I'll never increase my occupancy allowance under the rental code. And this was clarifying that whether you do that as an alteration, in addition, or new construction, new house or new ADU, you're still capped at the 2018 number.
Thank you. My
You're
finals week brain is clearly overloaded right now.
Other questions? All right. I'm going to declare the public hearing on this text amendment to the Ames Municipal Code to be open. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to address council on this particular topic tonight? Seeing and hearing none, I'll declare the public hearing to be closed. Are there any closing comments from staff or questions from council?
I'm just really excited to have this in front of us for approval. So thank you both for the work. And I think it's a good set of, like you said, compromises for both increasing density, but doing so in a way that will limit impacts to existing neighborhoods. So
I just appreciate how much staff has put into this, and there's a lot of stones you had to turn over and things you had to think about, and just the description on the adding bedrooms was a good example of just thinking through and making sure that they follow through with what council is giving direction and also what's taken place in prior years. So, all right, with that, I'd entertain a motion on first reading of ordinance.
Move on first.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. Thank you, Eloise.
So yeah,
Appreciate it.
thank you to Eloise, who's put the most effort in.
Okay, well, thank you, Eloise. Kelly's just.
Guys are too nice.
Thank you very much. All right, move on. Number 23, staff report regarding use of Tesla power walls in the Ames electric service system. Mr. Com.
Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the council, Donald Kahn, Director of Electric Service. At the last council meeting, there was a resident he's here tonight again, so that's Jim, that came and spoke during public comment. He's looking at putting in some Tesla shingles on his home and also then attaching a Tesla power wall. Historically, as solar panels are connected to homes, we have a process that we use that it's not only looked at by electric, but also planning and housing, inspections and stuff like that gets involved. Historically, one of the things in the past with Tesla power walls, there's a couple of things within our interconnection agreement. Let me back up and talk about our process. So the process is usually the homeowner and or the installer will fill out ahead of time a form that we call the interconnection agreement. This is one document that is routed not only to electric, but planning and housing, inspections, and anyone else that needs to look at it within the city. So it's a fairly streamlined process. There are certain documents or information that electric needs so that we look at ahead of time to make sure that historically the system will operate within our safety guidelines. And when we look at it, then we can say, okay, it meets all of the criteria and we sign off on it. Historically, we've had issues with some of the Tesla equipment that it didn't meet a couple of our design criteria. That was then communicated to Jim, which then led to his comments at the last meeting. Staff was able to sit down with Jim and his wife, who's also here, and talk through that, look at the information that he had. He's very desirous of putting in a unit, and
it just doesn't necessarily follow or track the normal way we do it. We normally like to look at all the documentation, sign off on it, and then give them approval. What we've come to a partial resolution, if you will, is Jim and his engineer are confident that the new Tesla Powerwalls now meet those criteria. So we're sort of at a chicken and an egg. We can't test his system to see if it does meet those new requirements until the system is put in, and then we run it through the testing process. So in sitting down with Jim, we said, all right, he is interested in getting it installed. We're giving him a conditional interconnection agreement that says, once you install it and meet the basically the two criteria, and I'll go through that, and it passes all those, he's good to go. However, if it doesn't pass, then he cannot interconnect it with the system. In talking with his engineer and talking with Jim, he is confident that it's going to meet that. In a nutshell, then, the criteria that we look at, there are two pieces, two fundamental pieces. One is when you shut the unit off, when you literally disconnect the system from the house, we require 300-second pause before you shut it off and put it back on. You want an actual 300 seconds before it re-engages, before it starts either pushing or pulling power. Historically, the Tesla Powerwall did not meet that. We would shut it off. The last one we tested, which has been a while, we'd shut it off and turn it back on, and it came on immediately, which is a safety concern, and it also harms equipment. The other thing comes down to some settings that originally were developed for California. They're called the California Rule 21. And that's a list of 12 items that it's actually the inverters that get set to these different settings. Historically, again, with the Tesla Powerwall, there was no clear way to demonstrate that the thing was programmed ahead of time. So with many other systems that we look at, you can look at the computer screen or the screen on the inverter and see how all the settings are. In the case of Tesla, my understanding and what they do is you install the system, and much like their cars, they beam in all of the settings as it's there installed, kind of like downloading on the computer, and that's how the settings get set. And then there either is a display, or then there's a written document that says the settings are in there and everything's good. So I think the fundamental disconnect was our process is trying in many ways to protect the customer up front. Give us all the information, we'll approve it, and you're good to go. Whereas in this particular case, to truly resolve this, we're both working to a common point of getting it out there, testing it, making sure we're not changing or asking council to change any of our requirements, but get it out there and test it. And if all goes well, Jim is happy, and then we can look at Tesla in a new light and say that that's a long answer to a short question, but that's where electric services and the homeowner are at. I'm open for questions if you'd like.
Yeah, council can ask you questions. We'll open up public comment in a minute. Questions for staff?
Well, Donna, this was very helpful background. How much of this are Ames specific requirements? In something like this, is there sort of a standard of care that cities have adopted? It sort of feels like on this side of the dais that what you're laying out is sort of an Ames specific set of expectations, but it just feels like by this point there should be an industry standard on how we approach these things. Could you speak to that?
Yes. So one of the things that we did since talking with Jim last week was we reached out to both utilities in Iowa and then more importantly utilities across the country. And there's not a specific, everybody does exactly the same thing. Tesla Powerwalls are fairly new in the Iowa footprint. California itself has adopted their California Rule 20, which is where we got our information. in talking to like Muscatine, which is a very similar municipal electric utility, he says, to be honest, we haven't even faced this yet. We don't even know what we would do. Talking to Mid-American, Mid-American says, well, we think we have a few on our system, but we don't know. So they don't have a process, much like Ames, where a customer will come and say, hey, I want to put this system onto our home. So there are widely accepted utility practices, but it's not something that is written down across the country that everybody is doing the exact same thing. So this is still.
And that's helpful. So 5 years from now, this will be a different landscape. And the other question I had, we're focusing on Tesla. Are there other players in the system so that are we adopting rules that will be flexible enough for other providers of these products?
I was with you until you said, are we adopting rules that are flexible? Rules shouldn't necessarily be flexible. They should be rules. However, there are many vendors out there that do meet this. I'm trying to think. NPower, I think, is one inverter that they pretty much do all of this all the time. So we get the documents and we've tested it and stuff like that. I believe it's just that I think part of the issue too is the last Tesla Powerwall that came to us was probably 1 to 2 years ago. So we don't see a lot of them. And I think Tesla has probably come a long way in meeting some of these criteria. I would think that they meet the California Rule 21 now, because that's a huge market for solar. So I don't want to say I'm confident, but I'm very, very, very hopeful that this final test goes well and they meet all of the criteria.
And I am too, but I'm going to come back. I'm not sure I heard the answer. So what we're putting together is an approach, not just for Tesla walls, but for other products as well, other vendors of these products. Is that correct?
We can do this. The key thing that we want to be very clear with the customer is normally we want to get it all done up front and have all of the paperwork and everything, the I's dotted, T's crossed, so that a customer then can make a substantial investment and know that they're good to go. In this particular situation, to say we were going to modify our process, go ahead and put it in and we'll test it. I believe that is the wrong approach, because you could get systems that put in there and then don't meet it.
Right.
And we've got them locked out. So I don't want to say that we're changing the process to wait till it's all in. We're doing this in this particular case. We've worked out a specific arrangement. He understands the risk that I hope he understands the risks that he's under, but I don't think that's good practice to just say, go ahead and put it in. And if it works, you're fine. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. And I'll put my pitch in now. This is an exciting time, right? Mm-hmm. So we're on the front end of seeing tremendous innovation, and we'll look back on this and we'll remember when we sort of stumbled our way through this. And so thank you, Jim, for your patience in working with us as we go through this. But it illustrates again just the quality that I love about our staff, about being forward-looking, innovative, not locked into a particular way of doing things. So thanks for modeling that for us.
Another question.
So, yeah, I have a question, and it's probably based on my ignorance of how this sort of thing works. But when I see interconnection agreement, I take that to mean that this is connecting to the grid in some way so that you can sell any excess power that you've got, and that also, if this doesn't work for some reason, that power wall could still be there. It just couldn't be connected to anything except your house. Is that right?
Let's have Don ask the question, and then Jim can answer if he wants to follow up during public comment.
So all of our homes are interconnected to the grid. Your home can affect Councilman Garton's home and stuff like that. So we're all interconnected with the distribution system. When a homeowner or a business would like to install a backup generator, or not even a Tesla Powerball, but solar panels on your home, without proper protection, there is the ability that during an outage, during a derecho, the solar panels without proper installation could feed into the system, harm someone. If a line worker is down the block and a power wall is connected and starts feeding, you're going to literally electrocute someone. So there's processes, and we're very careful on how any outside equipment is interconnected to the greater grid. That's the same thing with Jim's. I don't know if he's going to sell to the grid. It is hooked up to his home. Typically, the solar panels, in his case, they're solar shingles, will feed and power up the battery. And in all likelihood, he'll potentially use that energy when the sun goes down and it feeds back into a house. There may not be much. I don't know the specific design of his roof and things like that. So typically the intent is to continue to use solar power when the sun goes down.
So it will always be an interconnection. This isn't just about the selling of power. It is about the fact that all the houses will always be interconnected to each other if they are on Ames electric services.
Yeah, always another one of those words that makes me cringe a little bit. For the foreseeable future, yes. People
Okay.
could go off grid and everybody have their own wind turbine and things like that. So we may not be interconnected, but for the foreseeable future, what one person does affect their neighbors.
Other questions? Don, I want to go back. I think that you and I had a conversation after the council meeting, and I think that one is this concern about safety for our line workers getting electrocuted was really an eye-opener for me from the standpoint that this is not in place. But also, you talk about, it says damage of equipment. You talk about that someone was sharing a transformer with a connected, whoever it is. Can you talk about the effect that might have on adjacent neighbors also?
Yes. So the way we design the grid, the system, you'll have a distribution line that tapped onto a distribution line will be a transformer. It steps it down to household voltage. One transformer will typically serve 5-6 homes. So as people install equipment, again, this gets back to what we were just talking about. For example, if house A adds a electric vehicle or solar or a generator or a battery, all right, as that's being used, it's pulling the energy from that common transformer. So if 2 homes all put on electric vehicles, it's going to at least impact the use of the transformer and the other neighbors. In the case of a power wall, what potentially happens is when a power wall is either shut down or turned on, you get a large inrush. Typically, you would get unabated, you'd get a large inrush or outrush of current, which will go into that transformer, and a neighbor could theoretically see a voltage spike or a voltage dip from that. Part of the California Rule 21 does is it says these things are required in those settings to start up slowly so that you don't get huge changes in energy that could be seen by other people on the system. So that's part of the settings that are being required out there.
Which could damage someone's sensitive electric equipment, computers, TV, sound systems, whatever. The point is that I think, I appreciate the fact that we're trying to look out not only for the customer, but also adjacent neighbors and public safety. I'm not saying that the owner is not concerned about that, but the point is that this is not an arbitrary, we're just trying to make it difficult or complicated. And my understanding is that other manufacturers do already offer this. It's just Tesla has not been able to be documenting it prior to now. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions? And I apologize for the level of detail, but I think it's important that understand that it's all going into it. And there is no action required by council. This is already underway, correct?
I think staff and the homeowner have a good path forward, and if council's interested, we can let you know how the results are when,
Yeah.
or maybe Jim might.
Yeah. Okay. Jim, if you want to address or make any comments, you're welcome to do so.
Can I make them from here?
Actually, that's actually staff's table, so my preference is the voting.
Sure.
Please. Thank you.
That's fine.
Yeah, right.
So I do want to extend to everybody the appreciation for allowing me to come and speak. I do really appreciate Don and his staff. We were opportunity to sit down and work some of these things out. I'm not sure we're totally resolved on everything, but we are going to get the system installed. I want to express a couple points that I think are important to back up what Don says, and also to expand a little bit in the fact that part of my persistence on this is the roof, the solar system I wish is Tesla solar shingles, which look like everybody else's house. I don't have solar panels on my roof. You won't, unless you know that's a solar roof, you won't know it's producing power. With that said, you have to use Tesla Powerwalls because they're saying this is our system, this is our product. We know it all works together, and that's why the Powerwalls are required for that system. And I think, as Don has mentioned, I think this is an opportunity for a proof of concept. I'm 100% positive this is going to work. On the other side, Don had mentioned that they'd had issues before. I think we're now on like the 5th model of Tesla Powerwalls. So there are changes that are happening constantly to improve this. So it's a difficult concept, and changes are happening very quickly. I noticed today on there on the website, they now have a system set up on the Powerwall where you can disconnect it from the grid and ship nothing back, so that your solar shingles supply the power to the battery, which then supplies it to your house. When the batteries are full and you're not pulling any, they shut down the shingles, and you don't export any power back to the grid. So that appears to be an option also of not connecting to the grid to push power back, other than to only use it in my house, as Don mentioned. Possibility of not selling it back, not net metering, is still one option on that. But it's important that we give the opportunity for this proof of concept, because other people want to see the climate action plan move forward. And so my request on this also is, are you as a council getting updates on how many kilowatts are being produced by people like me who help us meet the climate action plan? When you voted that in June, you said you had items that you wanted to have implemented by December 31st of this year to show accomplishments, and the ability to show future councils what's happening every year. So I have this real feeling that there needs to be some sort of continued report and process by which the community can see this is what's actually happening. You know, I get my monthly electrical statement that says we replaced 120 streetlights because they burned out, but I don't see how many solar panels were added to our community. I don't see what my neighbors are doing to help us meet this program. And I think the part of that means we really need to push to the top of the list the sustainability coordinator to make sure this is happening. When we get to December 31st of this year, we've already got 1 out of 10 years gone that people can apply for federal tax credit. And if we wait another 6 months or another year, these things don't happen overnight. I mean, I've been working on this since March or April, trying to get my solar roof on it, and I still don't have it done. This afternoon, my neighbor and I met with a geothermal heat pump installer about what we could do to install geothermal in our house, because my furnace is 35 years old and I can't wait much longer. He says, we're not even scheduling people or taking orders because we're already 6 months behind. So my point being is that we need a coordinator who's going to be sitting here and helping explaining to people how much longer this is going to take. This doesn't happen overnight to meet all these requirements. And educating what the city of Ames is doing on climate action. I mean, I put in a heat pump water heater a couple months ago. We should have a sign on there that says there were 10 geothermal or heat pump water heaters installed in the city last month, creating a savings of X dollars. I mean, I look on there and I get my hot water for 12 or 18 cents a day. And when I get solar, it'll be nothing.
Can you draw your comments to a close, please?
I will. I do want to just
Go ahead.
request that if I come back in a month, can I get an update on what's been accomplished in the climate action plan that we voted on in June and get some kind of statistic? How many kilowatts were produced? Is there something we can do to help educate the people?
You made a statement that caught my attention. You said that I got the impression that not everything is resolved between you and electric. Is that correct? And if it is, what is not resolved?
Because we're still, we don't have it hooked up and producing electricity.
Oh, so the point is that you understand the risks.
Oh, absolutely.
And you understand the agreement. So more or less, it's just, you're just waiting to get this thing installed and then verify it's working.
And I think there's some concern because I know people in other parts of the state that have installed solar have waited 6 months to get the electrical companies. It's not the city of Ames, but people have waited months or weeks to get the connection installed. And there's a lot of investment there. If you sit with the solar panels for 3 months, not producing anything for your home, that cuts back on your payback.
Yep. Well, I think that we hope that it's successful and that Don will report back here in a few weeks that they're rocking and rolling. So thank you for what you're doing.
So to my question of what is the timeline for getting a report?
Well,
on
that's
how the
something they'll
CIP is going?
there'll have to be a referral from council to staff and ask them to look into that and see what kind of reporting system. So council's not going to answer that question for you. It's going to be a staff question. They're going to do some research. I'm sure Don will be engaged in that conversation.
All right.
Right?
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for coming. Anything else, Don? Any other questions?
And one follow-up for Don. So the last time we were talking about solar, my recollection is that your team was evaluating the rebate program we have. Do you have a sense of when we will have direction for the community as far as those options?
So there are several things that are coming out. I know the climate action plan. I know staff is working on a report through city manager's office that will be out here in the coming weeks that will talk a little bit about that. In terms of the rebate program and things like that, it's also impacted. We have a cost of service study going on too in terms of buyback rates and things like that. So that's probably still, I would say, second quarter of next year. That's not to say that we haven't had solar panels installed. I think we're up to 200. Last time we spoke, we were in the 150 range. We've got over 200 retail-owned solar panels or solar systems, if you will, within Ames already, and it continues to grow. I think we had 3 last week that interconnected onto the system.
And I'm just brainstorming, but as you think there would be a good place for this, having a forum, an open house to talk about the opportunities for this. I don't know that it has to be a city council workshop or something, but having something in the library or here that would be sort of a 101 on how to get started with solar. I think that also fits within our climate action goals of trying to just get the word out, and maybe Jim comes back and talks about his experience and others. I think that would be very interesting. Just food for thought.
Yep. Thank you.
Don, just out of curiosity, is it easy to generate a report like the one that Jim is asking for? Like how many kilowatt hours are produced by private solar in Ames?
Well, I know you all read your insert that comes in your bill, and I believe we state that on a monthly. Yeah. Oh, we don't. Okay. we do have that information. Maybe we can look at starting to add. So what you're looking for is energy overproduced by retail customers, the stuff that we're buying from the customer. We have that information and could add that to the newsletter. It's a month behind or so, but yeah, we can get it published.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to move on to number 25, budget issues guidelines.
Good evening. As we mentioned, it's that time of year where we're starting work on our budget. Everybody's been busy with their operating budgets, and I think later on this week we're entertaining some of the capital budgets. So it's an exciting time of year for at least our department. We have a brief presentation today about some of the items that now I'm stuck. Oh boy. Oh, maybe this is it. I thought I had this all figured out, so I apologize. Susan's our expert, maybe?
I'm sorry, is it just not advancing?
Maybe, yeah. Am I doing something wrong? No, it's all right. It might be the other. Thank you. Great, thanks. So what we're looking for tonight is a couple things. We're going to provide some assumptions that we've made, share some input that we've received from citizens. And then I think the most important part of this presentation tonight is to solicit information from the council and receive feedback on items to include in the budget, service level increases, and then, of course, potentially service level decreases. Got it. So just a quick budget overview. The unemployment rate based on the St. Louis Fed is at 2%. The per capita income growth is at 2.3% and an increase of GDP over last year of 8.9%. Just coming off Kelly's presentation on housing prices, the median listing price per square foot is $209, which is down from a historical peak in 2023. So coming down a little bit, but certainly not in leaps and bounds. One other thing I wanted to point out was when we did our Moody's presentation of our last general obligation bond issuance, they noted particularly the resilience of the tax base, largely based on the city's large institution employers. So that's a big part of our rating every year that stabilizes our budget and certainly the area. Well, last year was a busy year in terms of modifications to property tax legislation. SF 718 was the primary bill that affected local property taxes. The biggest component of that was a reduction in tax revenue for cities. There's a rather unique and complicated formula as it relates to the maximum revenue growth per city, and it's based on non-taxable TIF growth. There's three different categories. Non-taxable TIF growth under 3%. There's no cap on the $8.10 levy. We typically don't fall into that category. We typically fall into the next category, which is taxable growth over 3%, but less than 6%. In that scenario, whatever the city's growth would be, the calculation reduces it by 2%. So if we're at 4% growth, they reduce the total tax collections down to 2%. If we're above 6%, oh, sorry, Steve, did you have something?
Tax collections are the general levy.
Yes. Sorry, yes. We're talking about the general fund collections at this point. If you're above 6%, there's a 3% reduction in total tax collection. So in the upcoming year, there was a significant increase in taxable valuations. We may hit that mark, but in a standard year, when we look historically, that's not a category that we've fallen into typically. The other big component of SF-17 was exemptions. So there was several exemptions, but the two primary exemptions that will affect the city of Ames is the military exemption, which is increasing from $1,852 to $4,000, which doesn't seem like a significant sum. The difference is that that's not going to be funded by the state anymore. That's on the backs of the local governments to fund that exemption. And then the big one that garnered a lot of headlines was a residential exemption for members of the community who are 65 and older. That one will have a significant effect on us. We're working with Sherry to determine the impact, but for upcoming budget, the exemption is $3,250, and the year following, it's $6,500. So, of course, you have to apply for that exemption, but we anticipate a pretty significant impact on our taxable valuations.
And what about the military exemption?
We don't view that as significant. The difference is that it's funded by the city but will be funded by the city and no longer the state. So all in, well, that one's probably not as significant. I don't think we're still waiting on the total number of applications that Sherry received and sent to the Department of Management to know the actual amount. So.
Yeah, just philosophically, as a state, we promote ourselves as a state that welcomes veterans, and then we pull this stunt of shifting the responsibility. I mean, I'm not asking you to comment on that. That's for me to comment on. That we would then shift this to the backs of local governments to fund their proclamations. I just want to point that out.
Corey, can you also, this is not $4,000 reduction in property tax.
No.
Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so there's a difference between a credit and an exemption. A credit is dollar for dollar. So a credit, if your bill was $6,000, a credit would give you $1 off. So a $3,000 credit is a $3,000 bill. An exemption is just an exemption on the valuation. So it's the total taxable valuation of the property. So if the property is valued at $150,000, the taxable valuation for a military exemption would be $146,000. And then it would go through the calculation to come up with a total tax impact. So a little bit more complicated. I think when you look at it, though, the culmination of the number of exemptions is probably still pretty significant, even though it's not necessarily a credit.
And that applies to both city, county,
And school district.
and school district.
Yeah. Yep.
So if our levy rate's $11, for sake of discussion,
Sure.
or whatever, it's $11 times what, 3? It's a couple $100 essentially, right?
Yeah.
That's. I mean, I'm not trying to poo-poo it.
Yeah.
It adds up, but the point is, I just don't want people to start thinking, "Oh, well, I'm going to get $6,500, reduction in property tax." I mean, it's especially when your names, when you have high valuations. Well, lots of cities have high valuations.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gloria.
Yeah.
Please.
So does the state still fund the 65 plus exemption, or is that also
So,
us?
so that's a new exemption.
Okay.
They're not funding that at all. So that's why there was a good lineup outside of Sherry's office come last, November, December. So nope, that's all on the local governments to fund those exemptions.
Of course it is.
So the other thing that's interesting this year with just the astronomical valuations of property, the residential rollback moved down about 8% to about 46%. So we looked back, the league looked back, that is a historical record in terms of increase or decrease in terms of an assessment limitation or rollback. So while valuation growth may be really significant, we've heard numbers in the 20% increase in valuation in Des Moines Metro, and when you roll back 8% of that valuation, it really does kind of minimize some of those significant valuation increases. And then, of course, commercials at 90%, that remains the same. The remainder don't necessarily affect the city of Ames. We're primarily about 3/4 of our property valuation is in residential.
And the backfill's gone, and multifamily residential is now classified as residential.
I feel like you're leading me into my
Oh, I'm
next
sorry.
slide. This is good. No, thank you.
Is that the good news you're trying to share?
No, I'm
Well,
not.
thank you, John. Thank you, Mayor. That was an excellent transition. So this is, we're in our 4th year of a 5-year phase out for backfill. This is related to the reduction in the commercial rollback from 100 to 90%. So we fell, there was a calculation whereby the phase out number was either 8 or 5 years based on the growth of cities over a particular time period, and we fell into the 5-year phase out. So that's been going on for a while now. Next year will be our second to last year of that phase out. So the other piece that we do receive backfill for is the business property tax credit program that they modified, would have been 2 years ago. This is the first year we're receiving that backfill. But I think at this point, we understand that backfill is likely not guaranteed, and in difficult budget years, and in some years when it's not a difficult budget year, that begins to be eliminated. So just a quick overview of the general fund. We ended fiscal year 22-23 with about $16.3 billion. We have a pretty good revenue surplus of $825,000 and an expense reduction of about $5.2 million. The thing about that's important to consider is we have a lot of carryover of projects. So the downtown plaza, city hall improvements, we have a significant number of projects that are still underway. We're not exempt from construction difficulties as any business or organization is. And so those things we carry over from year to year. The bottom line is that it results in a $1.2 million net available balance when we compare to what we were at last year. So I believe the city of Ames has historically utilized those funds for one-time expenses. The rationale behind that was to avoid significant increases in the following year. So if we were to take those funds and decrease the upcoming levy for FY 24-25, we'd have to more than make that up probably in the following year. So that becomes kind of a challenging budget process, as we would do a kind of a roller coaster of tax rates from year to year, depending on the amount of excess revenue or decrease in expenses.
Might emphasize that number might increase as we finish looking at the current fiscal year to find out where the departments are going to end this year. So we're looking at that.
Yeah, thank you. That's just what we ended up last year with. So we're still working through some of our adjustments for this year.
So we prepared to give you a list of possible one-time capital improvements or projects that can be funded one time. That's excellent because it helps alleviate raises or increases in next year's budget. So we're able to do a lot of good things with that. So we'll show you, we'll have a lot of options for you for that.
Great.
At the budget time.
Yeah, at the budget time.
Not today.
Right. All the exciting stuff comes at budget time. We're just doing over tonight. So new in FY 23-24 was the ARCH program. I'm sure you all recall that's a 2-person team that responds to 911 calls in an effort to de-escalate, provide mental health support, mediate those type of things. Last year, I guess in the current year, the city funded $154,000 of their $325,000 budget. Our understanding at this point is that they're requesting additional funding through asset that would be, again, city funding. So one of the things to be considered during the budget process was the funding opportunities or available funding to continue to support that program. And that's something that we'll be touching on during the budget period.
Just to emphasize, we have a little bit of a challenge. We've now proven, I think, it's a successful program. At the time we did decide to partner with Mary Greeley, I think we urged them that we looked around the country. Other similar programs had helped finance it with more partners in the endeavor, or also were able to secure multi-year grant programs. So we kind of urged them. We didn't put that funding, that 154, in hard money. We used it leftover or carryover general fund money, hoping that we get a more realistic number for the next year. Well, they did. I don't think they found any other partners who want to join us. And they didn't, the one grant they have sought, and that's through the asset process. And they've asked for $187,000, all from the city's portion of asset. And I know Deb's here, it's going to be hard to start adding new agencies. So I think it'll come back upon us and Mary Greeley, at least for one more year, to share the costs with hopefully a guarantee that we'll both work together and try to get a multi-year agreement. So there are a substantial amount of funds out there at the federal level we can apply for. So we have to decide how we're going to finance this program for one more year, I think, until we get a good idea of what the program is going to cost. I think we had about 56 hours a week. They wanted to substantially increase that, but I think we're going to try to hold the line on the 56 hours a week and for 24, 25. So I'll have to report back to you how we're going to fund that ARCH program, because I'm not optimistic that Asset's going to be able to fund the 187,000. If they do that, they're going to be taking away from other the existing agencies. So I think we got to be prepared to help out here one more time at least.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Now we're going to just run through some of our rate implications as we've done some of the preliminary budgets. Just talk about some of the rate increases or stable rates. So Cyride's at 80% of pre-pandemic levels. Barb has indicated that they've had improved hiring and reduced vacancies, which is great. Of course, some of the first electric buses were placed into service. The Transit Board is requesting a 3.6% increase in their budget, but I think the most important thing is that they're only requesting 2.5% in support from the city, which we put directly into the tax levy. So that's I think that's kind of where they've ended up at this point, and it seems like a fairly reasonable request based on their federal funding. Last year, about this time, we suggested a 7% increase in sanitary sewer rates for FY 24-25. I think we're able to maintain that suggestion at this point, although, as we mentioned in Kelly's presentation, the cost of borrowing infrastructure is significantly impacting our capital projects. And in fact, the SRF program, which for the last more than a decade has issued debt on behalf of cities of 2%, is doing quarterly updates to their rates. So they're at 3%. They're going to review it in March. We expect an increase then. So we're very cautious in terms of what the rate market's going to look like as we looked at making major capital improvements. And then, of course, the impact on the rates. So can we sustain a 7% rate increase when we're borrowing at 4%? Those are
It's a big
important
challenge.
things.
The next couple of weeks, we're going to have to figure this out. Specifically relates to sanitary sewer. Remember, we have it's Tim's favorite project, the nutrient reduction project, $50 million or more. Well, when you increase the borrowing by 2% in interest increase, it's going to have substantial impact on our rates. Remember, we had alternated rates between like 8 or 9% between water and sewer. We're going in now, the sewer looks like it's going to be substantially higher than that. So we're going to have to work in the next couple of weeks. We may have to delay projects or cut projects out of the sanitary sewer to avoid some double-digit increase in rates for the next 4 years or so. So we're going to have to work hard on this and make some sacrifices, temporary sacrifices, if you want to keep those rates relatively reasonable. And that means under double-digit.
Can I ask here? So last week, the Wall Street Journal ran an article that the federal government is requiring all lead pipe service to be replaced in 10 years. Is that on our radar screen? Are we starting to? Is it?
We gotta figure out it's always on our radar screen. The impact on what they're going to require, the actual requirements aren't out there yet, so we don't know.
Yeah, we've had some discussions about that and what do we do in terms of rate structure and capital project adjustments to consider that. We also don't know if there's federal funding available for those type of things. So it's a big, complex question that we still don't have the answer.
Remember, we have an inventory of all those. We did it a number of years ago. I don't know if you were the council, but we have an inventory where all the lead pipes are. And as we do street projects, remember, you'll see that up on Grand Avenue taking a long time. We also replace the service lines, lead service lines. But we've got to get the true program in place, see what the requirements are, what the financing is, and those type of things. We're always thinking about it. But that will have substantial impact on our rates above and beyond that, too.
Right. Thanks.
All right. Talk about electric rates. At this point, we're not anticipating any change in electric rates. The caveat to that is that there'll, in all likelihood, be continued ECA adjustments, which is the energy cost adjustments based on the natural gas price. So that automatically adjusts on a monthly basis based on the cost of power, including purchase power from MISO. So that continually adjusts, but we're not anticipating any significant rate changes in the base fee. The other thing that we're currently doing, and Don mentioned it during his presentation, is we're undertaking a rate study for the electric utility. So I think preliminarily there's probably a pretty strong suggestion that the city decrease some of the base rate or the minimum rate and move towards a more a more costly usage and demand rate. So still working through those things, but we have indicated, and Dawn's done a really nice job of suggesting revenue neutrality in terms of what the city needs to collect, offset some of our expenses.
Although as we implement our climate action plan, we're looking now, we'll get your report next month, as was mentioned, looking at maybe 50 new megawatts of wind, and that may have an impact on our rates. That's not figured in there yet. So that all changes as we implement our plan. And it's interesting, you're going to get the resource recovery later, aren't you?
Next, actually, good lead. Yeah, that's great. So here is the resource recovery. Preliminarily, staff is recommending an increase in tipping fees from $62.50 to $75. So that's the significant increase. That's related to the change in the gas contract that was approved last December. Slightly, I think we had a very advantageous gas contract up until that point. So that's really taking into account that new contract. But it should be noted that we're not recommending a per capita fee increase for the partnering communities at this point.
Per capita's increase in property taxes paid by all the partners. Remember, we had the wedding cake approach. Remember, we talked about that when we did our locked in our contract for gas. So to save costs, if you remember, on those tails, so those tails of both ends of the wedding cake, it drops off. We had to agree we were going to reduce garbage or refuse going into the plant, right? And that's good news, right? We want people to recycle. We're going to recycle cardboard. We're going to reduce that. But that means there's less garbage going in the plant. There's less revenue. So we have to offset that by increasing our tipping fee. Tipping fee is charged to the hauler. The hauler then will charge it back to our customers. Hopefully there'll be competition, so it won't be a direct pass through. It depends what their rates they're offering. But that's how that'll be handled in the near future anyway.
Last, in terms of rates, there's no anticipated rate change for stormwater rates. We're currently at $5.20 per ERU. So anticipate that remaining stable, at least for the upcoming year. Next, we'll look at a couple projections in terms of our revenue sources. So the first one is a hotel motel tax. This is just a quick reminder that there's a 7-cent hotel tax, 5 cents goes to Discover Ames. 1 cent is a replacement of the local option sales tax, so a 60% tax reduction and a 40% community betterment program. And then 1 cent goes to the hotel motel tax fund for economic development. So this is what we're looking at. We touched base with Discover Ames. They were not terribly optimistic in terms of collections for the upcoming year. We took that into consideration when projecting our revenue. So we kept those stable or projecting to keep them stable for FY 23-24 and 24-25. Kind of a conservative approach. There was an indication there was less events forecasted in the future. So we're just kind of taking a conservative approach at this point. Of course, we do adjustments a couple times a year. So if we saw a big bump or significant increase, we can make that modification. But that's where we're at right now. Road use tax fund, we saw a 4% or 4.6% increase from 21-22 to 22-23. The Department of Revenue and the DOT are somewhat reluctant to give very progressive estimates of road use tax collections, although through the first quarter, they've had pretty positive collections. So just very modest increase over the next couple of years is where we're looking at right now. But I think through the first quarter, we believe that those projections will be able to be sustained.
That's not much of an increase, if you know. Remember, a lot of our capital improvements and operating costs on streets paid for our road use tax. And our costs have probably gone up more than that a little bit that they're projecting. So we'll hope we get more.
It's all based on actual collection.
Right. We hope we'll get more revenue than that.
Yep. I think the headliner is probably local option sales tax. We've seen a significant increase in the last 4 years. We're projecting 12% for 24-25. That's just based on the first quarter of collections. They changed the way the state changed the way that they're passing through collections, so it's a little bit difficult to do any analysis, but we believe will be about $12 million for FY 24-25, just based on historical collections of what we've done through the first quarter. So that's roughly a 5% increase over the current adopted budget. So we feel like that's still a relatively conservative estimate, and the local option sales tax fund does have a pretty strong fund balance. So we feel pretty good about that.
And so of that, do you know, Corey, what percentage is internet purchases?
That's not information I think that's available to us. We could seek that out from the Department of Revenue. And
I was just curious.
The state provides some details. I don't know if they give us that granular a detail, but we could try and find out.
I was just curious. The United States versus South Dakota versus Wayfair changed the score, and that allows us to capture that. So I was just, oh my goodness, yeah. I was just curious if you can find that.
No, we can look into that. The state does provide quarterly reports primarily for their own projections, so we may not be able to get it specifically for City of Ames, but we might be able to get it statewide.
Yeah, just curious. Thanks.
It's safe to say, though, is that we're not capturing all of the online sales tax. Been an ongoing conversation with the mayor's group, and in some locations, one mayor purchased like 10 different items, 15 different items online, and only two charged the full 7%. Some charged 6%. The point, it varied significantly. So the point is, it's been brought to the Iowa legislature's attention, but the point is that needs to be really captured, because the point is, so we hope that most of them are.
Amazon does.
Yeah. So the point being is that there's still some loss. There's still some leakage, we believe. But the point is that I don't know if you can ask the state, but I'm not sure they're going to be able to do a real accurate handle.
Sometimes they're better partners than others. So
Is local option sales tax likely to be back on the table at the legislature again this year?
It's uncertain. Doesn't sound. I won't say. Yeah, it's like Don saying, "Don't ever say never, ever," But rumor has it that some of the tax bills may not be as front of mind this year, but we'll see.
Remember, 60% of the proceeds go to reduce property taxes. So if we have to share that with more people, it's distributed out that way. It's going to affect our citizens.
all right. Last couple of slides of ours. We have interest rate revenue. Obviously, we said that our borrowing costs are up. Our interest rate revenue is also up. So we projected just under or over $8 million in FY 23-24, $8.1 million. The city maintains pretty strong fund balance, which is also noted in our Moody's report. As kind of mentioned, we've been buying some a little bit longer term securities, which with an inverted yield curve means we're probably not getting as great of a return, but we're really trying to minimize significant increases in interest revenue now and a significant decrease later on. So we've been buying a little bit longer securities. That's why in FY 24-25 you see a decrease of $7 million. So never really sure when the market's going to adjust and interest rates are going to fall, but we're trying to mitigate that by buying a few securities that are longer term. The city participates in 2 state-run pension systems, Municipal Police and Fire, and then IPERS. As you can see, the only adjustment to the pension systems this year was MFPRSI, which is decreasing from 22.99% to 22.66%. That board has indicated, which actually Dwayne Pitcher is a member of now, as a public member, is plans to decrease, I think, the rate for a few more years. They're pretty well funded and have a pretty aggressive growth plan in the upcoming years. And then finally, similar to last year, health insurance, we're indicating 8% increase for FY 24-25, which is the same as last year. The big drivers for that is, of course, medical claims and excess health insurance rates. Tonight on the consent agenda, you did approve PBM, which will reduce some of our pharmacy claims, which is great. I think that's something that's probably long overdue and is going to save significant funds. So staff, particularly Bethany's group and the city manager's office, are doing a really nice job of looking ways to mitigate some of those increases, although medical costs continue to rise. So that's becoming increasingly difficult. So I think the next few items will be presented by people besides Nancy and I. The first one is asset, which is the human services funding.
Deb has agreed to come back and help the city of Ames, so we should thank her.
Thank you.
Acting Assistant City Manager
It's good to be back.
with limited powers, but
Corey, while she's getting set up, what's our cost of borrowing gone up interest rate wise? You showed what our revenue is. Do you track that in terms of how much we've had to pay extra?
In
Or-
terms of dollar wise or just
Mhm.
rate wise?
Yeah, dollar wise.
No, I haven't looked at dollar wise, rate wise. We're up above 2% where we were just like 18 months ago. So, and our financial advisors indicated that they don't anticipate that stopping. So, yeah, it's unpredictable. We just know that our borrowing costs are higher.
So if we're borrowing $10 million, you're going to have 2% more by and large in terms of per year for
Yeah.
additional cost for interest then.
Yeah, we can try and structure things that minimize the impact, but there's just really no way to get around the cost
Yep.
of borrowing.
Understood. Hi, Deb.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's good to be back. I do have one of our asset volunteers with me this evening, so I would like her to introduce herself.
My name is Becky Harker. I also serve as the vice chair of the asset board.
So Becky gets to not only sit in on all of the asset board meetings, but the asset administrative team meetings as well. So we really appreciate her willingness to serve in that capacity. I also want to recognize the other 4 volunteers who aren't with us tonight, but they are Ed Gillott, Mike Lazier, Kathy Gullion, and Nick Juice. And Kathy and Nick are newer volunteers, and so they're going to be going through the allocation process for the first time coming up in January. Of course, then we have a vacancy. Ashley Thompson was one of our volunteers, and she accepted the president and CEO position with the United Way of Story County and starts that role on January 2nd. So she'll be involved in asset in another capacity. So as you know, with human services funding, one of the first steps that council takes is establishing those priorities. And that was done back in June before I left the city. And so those priorities were included in the report, just kind of as a reminder for council. And of course, the first priority and high priority is meeting mental health and substance use disorder needs through a variety of community services. The second highest priority is meeting basic needs, and that would include food, shelter, child care, transportation, and financial literacy types of programs. And then the third priority is providing youth development services and activities through skill development and summer enrichment and that prevention of loss of learning types of programs. So that's what we have set for fiscal year 25. We provided a table to just show you what the funders' allocations have been going back to fiscal year 2018, 2019. And there are the 4 funders in the process. So the city, Story County, United Way, and Iowa State Student Government. Central Iowa Community Services, the mental health region, was a funder in the process at one point in time, but they withdrew. But they continue to provide funding to mental health and disability services throughout the Story County as well as the region, which is 15 counties. So there are times throughout the asset allocation process that although council will identify an allocation amount through the process of listening to the agency hearings, reading liaison reports, looking at the outcome reports and budgets, that the volunteers may not allocate all of the funds that council has made available. And there can be a variety of reasons for that. In the past, funds were set aside specifically for housing services or other kinds of needs that may come up over the course of the year. That was especially done during the pandemic years. And then for fiscal year 24, our current fiscal year, there was a total of $66,259 that was set aside for an RFP for emergency shelter services. That's just the city's share. The total amount is $181,650. And so that's funding from the city, Story County, and United Way of Story County. So those dollars are still kind of in that set aside position, and we plan to bring forward recommendations to the funders at the joint funders meeting in January on what to do with those funds.
So to clarify, Deb, so the asset allocated all of the money that we put forward, but it just set aside the funds for the emergency shelter services. Am I saying that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Yep. And we also then have throughout the year, for a variety of reasons, agencies who may not draw down their entire allocation. Sometimes that's due to staffing issues. It might be due to just other changes in services. Maybe there's not as many clients accessing the service as originally projected. And so for fiscal year 22-23, there was a little over 5% that was not drawn down by agencies. So that was a little over $96,000. That just reverts back to the local option fund. Okay. So for fiscal year 24-25, we have reviewed those budgets, and agencies are asking $2,280,601 just from the city. So a little over 2.2 million. It's just the city's request. Asset as a total, all the funders, the amount being requested is $5,959,279. And so that's up over our current allocation of all the funders by about 1.1 million. So it's up quite a ways. So for the city, it's about almost a 25% increase over our budgeted amount for the current year.
Any sense of why it's such a large percentage?
I think we're looking at increases in wages. We're looking at, we have new services. So we have 3 new services in the process, and one new agency, Mary Greeley Medical Center, is in the process and is asking, as Steve mentioned earlier, that amount for the ARCH program. And the city's only funder being asked to fund that particular program. Other kinds of costs, just a lot of it's related to staffing. We have had a program through YSS that lost a state grant, and so they're asking for that to be made up through the asset process. So I'm just going to go briefly through some of the requests that I wanted to bring to your attention, and can entertain any questions you may have about them. American Red Cross for their disaster services. Historically, the city has been a funder of these services, and a year ago they did not request any funding from the city. They requested it all from United Way. And when inquired about that during their hearing, their response was they thought by requesting it all through United Way, then United Way would funnel it to the other funding bodies. And that's never been the case. And so we made sure that they were aware of that. They ended up not being funded by United Way either for the year. And we had just learned through our conversations with them that with their federal charter, they are required to provide services, whether there's a local component or local funding match to it or not. But they've requested city funding again, and it is the amount that we had funded them in fiscal year 2023. The Bridge Home, their increases in ask are for supportive housing and service coordination. Supportive housing was a new service in the asset process a year ago. And so they're, and none of the funders had allocated or provided funding for that particular service. We felt that emergency shelter was really where the higher need is at this point in time. But supportive housing is, the amount is $40,000 from the city. And then rapid rehousing, it's a combination program of service coordination and then helping people with rent and utility assistance. the resources that are provided by the case manager help people maintain their housing, get employment, and improve their financial situation so they can eventually sustain on their own and not have to worry about their housing being subsidized. So the city is currently funding service coordination in the amount of $5,752, and the request for 2025 is $19,675, so over a 200% increase.
Do we know why that increased?
They project serving more units of service and really wanting to focus on getting people in longer term housing, which makes sense. So Mary Greeley Medical Center, new agency in the asset process, and they're asking for the funding for the ARCH program. And they are looking at increasing their hours of service from 56 hours a week now to 80 hours a week in fiscal year 2025. And so you know the history behind funding them this current year to get them going. And as Steve mentioned earlier, the amount asked by the city is a heavy lift, but it's $186,696. And they are looking at requesting some funding from Iowa State and student government as well.
Not much.
That will be a conversation we'll have with the volunteers. Raising Readers in Story County, they have a public education service. This is a new request to the city for $5,000. The Community Academy, they were a new agency a year ago in the asset process, and they provide out-of-school programming. And they are requesting $180,000 from asset as a total, and of that amount, $48,260 is requested from the city, and that's about an 865% increase. They're looking at providing more opportunities and programming throughout the year versus just in the summer. And we had some conversations around that, whether or not that was a newer expanded service and going through Asset's newer expanded service process. And they want to serve more individuals, focusing on low income, providing more units of service. And then two more new services in the process are being provided by the Salvation Army. The first service is emergency shelter. So they've been doing this on a very limited basis due to the donations that they receive to provide the service. They use local hotels to house people. And so they are requesting $5,000 from the city for that service next year. And then their second new service is a vehicle repair service that falls within the asset category of emergency assistance. This will help somebody repair their car, up to $300 in a repair. And they are using specific local automotive repair businesses to do this. So they've engaged in those relationships. And if the repairs exceed the amount of $300, then the individual has to verify or be able to show that they can make up that balance before the $300 is paid. So Salvation Army is requesting $2,000 from the city for that new service. And then lastly, we have YSS, the NEST and Employment Assistance for Youth. So YSS is requesting a significant increase from the city for the NEST program, and that this is the program that lost state funding. And this is the program where families, if they meet the milestones with their well child, checkups and other kinds of medical appointments, then they can go to YSS and maybe get a car seat or diapers or those kinds of products or items that are needed for an infant or a young child. So this was a program that also was offered in coordination with their family development program, which also lost state funding, but they're not requesting that funding through assets. So the NEST program is a request of $16,626. And the size of increases are similar to the other asset funders. And then they're also increasing additional dollars for their employment assistance for youth. We're currently funding them at about $21,000, and they're requesting a little over $42,000, which is over 100% increase. Again, wanting to reach more students in the school system for employment opportunities. So any questions on those highlights? Okay, service outcomes reporting. This is what we use through Clear Impact Scorecard. So agencies report what they want to use as metrics, and then we report annually on how we're doing on those metrics. And this is something that has been in place for a long time. We're finally seeing these trend lines. And one of the things that Steve and I had talked about a couple of weeks ago is really creating that scorecard for the city, for city council. What are your priorities? And then how are the outcomes meeting those priorities? Where are those trend lines? And so you really need that scorecard, and maybe perhaps through the management analyst position, that is a function of that individual to help gather that information, track that information, and help report it as part of the asset report to council. But I think, time is really here to be able to share that information and show that to you. United Way has their own scorecard, and we continue to help pay for the Clear Impact Scorecard software. So I really hope that's something that can be worked towards so that council has their scorecard and can track those outcomes and fund services accordingly. We have administrative expenses. Jenny Schill is our asset administrative assistant. And so those expenses are go towards her salary, the website, virtual programming, printing, those kinds of things. So we're at the funding options portion of this discussion. And so we've outlined what it would look like if you kept the funding at a flat level. For this year, what a 3% increase would look like, a 5%, or what it would look like if you were to fully fund at the 24.4%.
Deb, do you have any knowledge of what the other funders are going to do yet?
Yep, the only other funder that's acted on an allocation is United Way, and they are giving, they've voted on a 3% increase, so it's about $34,000 more coming into the process. My understanding is the county will probably take a look at this closer to the end of December.
So what we're usually asked for at this time, so the asset group could start working, is a pot of money is what you're trying to authorize. They will come back in February with their actual recommendations per agency. That's not, you don't have to worry about that yet. It's the pot of money. Done that in the past. And last year we gave, was it 6% is what it was? You've got the page with all the previous ones.
I have two questions for Corey. So our general budget in the next fiscal year will be ballpark how much? Just trying to see how the asset budget is a percentage of the larger budget. This is a fairly small piece of our.
No, you don't.
You have a ballpark?
You don't mean that, do you? I mean, they're all from different funds. Do you mean out of the funding source, the
Correct.
local option?
Correct.
Okay, so what percentage of the local option money goes to them?
Well, we're estimating $12 million, and if we did a 5% increase, it would be just under, let's see, just over $1.9 million. So, I don't know.
Well, let's do this. 60% of the 12 million has to go to property tax.
Yeah,
relief.
we're restricted to that.
So then you leave the other 40%, which is
4.8 million.
4.8 million,
Right.
and you're giving them of the 40%, and of that 4.8, you're giving almost $2 million. So about half, almost not quite 50% of the amount that's available to be allocated from the local option tax fund for community betterment.
Right. And so my question is slightly different. So our contribution towards asset is what percent, just ballpark, of the total budget that we have?
Well, our total budget's
280?
$275 million,
Yeah.
depending on CIP
Different.
projects.
Yeah. And then the second question is really more for Steve.
Yeah.
Do you have any guidance for council as we think about making these determinations and these different questions in light of the budget, the changes to the budgeting process we have? Is there any counsel we would have? Do we do anything differently in light of the changes that we're seeing?
No, there's a lot of needs out there, but there's always needs, and it's tough to give people 10% increases. We think we feel comfortable with 5 to 6% again.
Okay, thanks.
So one of the big increases here is that request from Arch, from Mary Greeley. Is that something that can be pulled out of asset and funded some other way?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
We I think you should pull that out. We have to be prepared to finance at least half of that, and we'll tell you the exact amount. And we could probably do with that available balance money for another year, and then we'll have a year under our belt. We'll try to get some grant money. I wouldn't want the organizations, the other asset groups to have to suffer or
Yeah.
split it.
Well, that's a significant chunk of,
Yeah.
if you said a 5% increase, that 186
No, it would have to come out of
plus is
everybody
a
else's
lot.
pocket. I
Yeah.
don't think I would do that. If you're asking my opinion, I wouldn't do that.
So one way of looking at this is an arbitrary percent.
Right.
Another way to look at it is, maybe Becky can comment on this, because you go through this process and the agencies. What are the needs? I mean, have the needs substantially increased that these agencies are meeting that warrants X number of additional dollars? Or is there any sense that we are actually, that the asset agencies are being very effective and the scorecard is showing that they're meeting the needs? I'm not advocating for either a little or a lot. I'm just trying to think a little differently. In terms of how do you approach it? Because it just seems like, we could say so much percent. Does that make sense? I mean, and Deb, you've been part of this for a number of years and have a really good sense on that. I mean, are we meeting most of the needs, and it's not as much? It's more or less just inflation that they're experiencing, or maybe you and Becky can comment just anecdotally in terms of what you've seen and what your sense is.
Yeah. What I've seen in my current role, experienced as a partner agency to a lot of these other agencies, are needs continue to grow, especially around housing, food security, childcare, transportation, and mental health. I mean, it's just, there's so much overlap in all of those. And that's not to say that the other services aren't important, but I think what happens is a lot of staff time in organizations gets spent on trying to figure out these very complex situations. I mean, it's not just so much anymore that somebody gets 10 visits of therapy and then they go on. It is, it evolves into medical needs, and then, maybe special accommodations at work so they can continue working to pay their mortgage payment or their rent. I mean, it's the staff time and trying to figure out all the levels and layers that are involved in somebody's life. And then from an asset perspective, making sure that if that's duplicated across agencies, is it necessarily duplicated or is it unnecessarily duplicated? And I know we'll hear a lot from those who are helping with rent and utilities, that you could have somebody go into each agency that offers rent and utility assistance and getting help there, or several of the agencies have to pool together in order to help with 1 month's rent. And so they've exhausted. So it's needs are definitely there. I don't see there being, any decrease, but maybe just more complicated and complex situations.
Well, and I think the asset volunteers have always done a really good job of trying to figure out how we can get the most value out of the money that is contributed from all the funders. And there's been years where we've allocated a certain percentage and they haven't allocated it all out to agencies because they didn't believe that, perhaps giving X amount to this agency met the priorities or would actually move the needle in terms of meeting outcomes and that sort of thing. So it is a little bit arbitrary, but I don't think that asset volunteers ever feel like they need to spend every single penny if it's not actually justified.
Yeah, the question I was just trying to tease out is if there really is a significant growing need, maybe that might cause council to think maybe we should fund a higher percentage in terms of dollar increase. But if it's more or less static, and of course, if we talked before, we're not the primary funder of all these. That's not the intent. We're supposed to be supplementing, not being the funder of it. So, any thoughts, Becky? Or?
Well, I worked for years with providers throughout the state, human service providers throughout the state. And a key component of their success, their ability to meet goals, objectives, have an impact is on the staff. And I think we're seeing that more and more here during the asset process when they can't open a room for infants because they don't have staff. And the staff, it's difficult to get staff who have the commitment at a pretty low pay rate. So I think that's huge, but I think we've been able to sort of suss that out during the process and look at who's trying to do what to remedy that, to increase the impact. And I think that's huge, but it's huge across the state. The nice thing is we live in a college town, and so there tends to be more resources than in Mobile, Iowa, Yeah.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I was noticing was the amount requested and the amount contracted in the last 2 years. And looking at the 8% city increase in 22-23, and then 339,000, almost 500 is left on the table because it's not contracted. We come closer the next year, but there's still 167,288 that's not contracted. So there's a disconnect between what's requested, what we budget for, and what actually gets contracted. And so
Can I speak to that for a minute? Can I?
Yeah.
Okay. This is what I like about this process, because we're making better decisions, and we're not funding at the level that people ask if we don't have the data, if we don't have impact, if we can't see how many people were served. So to me, it's like a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we're not just paying for activity, we're paying for outcomes, we're paying for impact. And I'm sorry, but I'm one of the ones that's like, I'm zero. We're not doing that because it's not our money. And there are people in the system that are doing great work and don't have enough money to come close to do what they could. And I'm sorry, but it makes me hot.
I appreciate that heat, Becky, because I look at that and I say, so where is the realistic request here? Because we have some agencies that are doing excellent work with the money that is allotted to them and are maxing out what their allotment is and not giving us huge increases all the time. So I don't know how to understand.
Let me add one thing though too, is that the leadership team with the funders, the funder leadership team has spent a lot of time working with people that weren't producing or giving us what we needed to be able to fund them at the level they wanted. So I make it sound a little mercenary. It's totally not, because of the funding staff or the leadership staff who really put a lot of time in.
Well, and I think we've gotten better over the years at looking, like you said, at outcomes, but also recognizing that
there are agencies that came to rely on asset as their sole source of
Yes.
funding their organization, which is a completely irresponsible way of operating a nonprofit. And I think we've helped people recognize that we are not going to be, the savior if something else happens to an outside source that there, or a grant that goes away and then they come to asset to backfill that grant. So I think there has been education that has taken place over the last few years to help agencies understand that they need to diversify their resources, and that, like I said, if something goes away, we cannot be the filler of that funding.
And I think I would add to that, Amber, just making sure that the volunteers and the agencies know the funders fund services.
Right.
We're not here to make sure an agency is made whole by our funding. We are purchasing services based on our priorities, based on outcomes. And I want to make sure and write that down somewhere. So when I'm gone, that can carry on, because that's really an important part of this. And it really helps us stay as a municipality, stay in the good graces of our auditing partners as well, as far as how we're supposed to be.
Okay, so is there any other questions that you have for Deb or Becky? Thank you both for perspective, and they're looking for some direction in terms of either a specific dollar increase or a percent increase.
I'd move that we do 5%.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
Do we need to include like taking arch out in that or no?
I think that
They'll
would
come
fall
back.
to the volunteers. Is that right? Or Steve, is that correct? Or how are you going to
Well,
handle
they
it?
apply, Mary really applied for it.
Yeah, asset's
so I
going to
can't-
review them anyway.
I
as
can't
part
say
of the
take it
pro-
out.
Yeah.
I'm just prepared
But
to.
we could always,
I can communicate.
Deb's got
Yeah.
Perfect.
What
Okay.
was discussed here? Yeah.
Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried.
All right. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
I just want to say again, thank Becky. I know that you guys put a lot of time in.
Mhm.
Thank you as a volunteer and for the other volunteers. And I know Ashley was a hard worker, and we're thrilled that she's moving into the United Way. And Council, Deb and I talked about, do we want to head and fill that position, right away? And she just said that they're going to go right into doing meetings and evaluation, and the orientation process takes quite a long time. So it was her suggestion that we just go through in April 1 appoint for a normal
Yeah,
cycle.
She was finishing her last term, so
Yeah.
we would be looking anyway. But
Anyway, the point is that someone says, well, why aren't we getting someone to fill it in? It's not like it's just easy. Or is it very easy, Becky? You can just go ahead and figure it out in a day or two.
What do you think?
Is this an easy process? Is this easy
Oh.
to understand?
No. It took Becky years to develop that hardcore approach.
Well, that's why we appreciate every volunteer and the work that they do. So, Deb, thank you for your help too.
Yep,
Very
thanks,
much,
Deb.
very much
Thank you.
appreciate coming
you.
in and helping out. So, Council, we have I've been told for CODA and other outside funding requests, we have a staff member that
Yeah, unfortunately, my expert unexpectedly had to go home, so I don't want to fill in for him. So can we wait till next week to get that direction?
Sure.
Then you can read all his material. He'll be able to answer questions and then think about a percentage increase too in those two outside funding and also your quota.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can do it next week.
So are you complete with your presentation? Victoria?
Good for us.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item number 26. Entertain a motion on second reading of ordinance amending Chapter 28, Division 1 for eligibility of customers for time of use based on electrical demand.
Move in second.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Entertain item 27. Entertain a motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4513 on amending the zoning text amendment for reduced affordable housing parking requirement.
Move on third.
Second.
All right. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. And item 28, entertain motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4514 to amend the urban revitalization area boundary.
Move on third.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, moving on to disposition of communications to council. There are 4 items, and item number 1 from Jane Wallace and Ron McCochran, Water's Edge Townhome Association. Steve checked with staff. There's no referral necessary. Actually, it's already a city path, and the association has already been notified by staff. So
Okay.
that's been resolved. Number 2, Naomi 11 wrote an email regarding truck route in East Industrial Zone, and staff's recommendations are forwarded to Damien to confer with the county engineer. It's actually outside of the city limits. We don't designate truck routes and most roads in county jurisdictions, so refer to staff and ask staff to reply to Naomi after consultation with the county engineer.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Third is Valerie Stahlbaumer was here. She actually submitted a bunch of petitions and also gave input on the 5th Street brick pillar. So that's going to be on the agenda next.
I have to talk to Brian, who's not here. Brian will put it on.
Okay, so it's either going to be next week or early next year to talk about this. So anyway, so that's just information for you. And then the last on Damien, referral of request for speed limit reduction on 6th Street. You should have all gotten a memo and review that. No action is necessary. He's going to, once those new standards come out, he's going to review the speed limit. So. All right, with that, we'll move on to council comments. Gloria?
Do we need a referral to staff to have that additional information on this solar power production by individual private users?
I would suggest not only that, but I mean, I think it's all forms of alternative energy, wind and solar, and if there's other things that are going on, it's available.
Rebates given on heat pump devices.
So
Just make a motion, make sure.
I'm not sure how to collectively say that, but I would move that we ask staff to report on and highlight use of alternative energy by our power customers in whatever way is the most efficient for making it known to the public.
Second.
So just a quick question is that it sounded like the request from Jim was periodic. Means they're going to be monthly? Is it going to be quarterly? I was wondering if staff could.
Yeah, we'll come up with something.
I think that Don and Susan were discussing adding it to what they're already doing. So that seemed to me to be regular reporting, but.
So currently, wind, solar, and RDF is reported every month in the back of the city side.
No, but I think we'll more define how many private solar systems are in place. But also what we give for demand side management. Some people have done things that have been reducing their carbon. So maybe there's a way we can capture all that in a report.
I think it's more or less to try and capture, I mean, not to add to the motion, but how are we doing in terms of working towards our climate action plan as well, too?
It's broader than just solar as well. So.
Right.
I think your staff's got a good idea what you're looking for.
Grace will get that somehow.
Grace, you go ahead and massage that motion for us.
It's all of that, Grace.
Yeah.
All right.
Report on lots of things.
All right. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Anything else?
No.
We're going to say goodbye to some Iowa State seniors this weekend. I teach a senior class and we've enjoyed them. And one of them happens to be my son. So last one to finish from Iowa State. So
who's celebrating more, you or him?
That's a good question. Nothing else.
Nothing tonight.
Nothing for me.
Nothing for me, thanks.
It
Jeff.
is Iowa State Finals week, as
Mhm.
was said, so it's been super busy on campus. I think the library is more packed than I've ever seen it, which is surprising. It's weird how everyone discovers the library like during the last week of school. But other than that, don't have much else. Student Governor Senator Azan was sat as as one of our asset volunteers, so that's pretty fun. And that's about all I have.
All right. Very good.
And I guess I do have a question. We're meeting the 26th of December.
No,
Or-
actually, yeah, just it was make that mentions that
Okay.
we'll have a regular council meeting next
Okay.
Tuesday night, and then
Next
that's our last council meeting for the year.
Perfect. Okay. Sweet. Just wanted to make
Yep.
sure so I didn't miss anything.
All right. And as we talked about, open up with what a worthwhile initiative for this, Reads Across America. And I actually have several of my grandsons come out, and help, and they look forward to it from a standpoint. It's very memorable to go and repeat someone's name and place a wreath at their headstone. So those who are, and boy, the weather is going to be amazing. Last year it was snow on the ground, had to try and clear the snow off the headstones to see the names. And 2 years ago, it was just bitterly cold. So it should be real nice. So if you can make it, and it goes very, very fast. There's a lot of people out there, and I think about less than an hour, it's all the boxes are empty, and it's pretty moving. So anyway, all right. With that, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Second.
All right. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.